Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your alarm clock is a human being ringing a handbell at 4 in the morning, where indoor plumbing means a pot you really hope doesn't tip over, and where your entire day revolves around keeping a single family comfortable while you yourself freeze, starve, and wonder if maybe that life as a highway robber wouldn't have been so bad after all. We're talking about a typical day in a 17th century English country manor household, and spoiler alert, if you're not the lord or lady of this particular pile of stone and privilege, you probably won't survive past 40 without losing several teeth, most of your illusions, and possibly a limb to gangrene. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how this weird little sleep history community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're dead asleep on a straw pallet in the servant's garret when the bell starts clanging. Not a gentle tinkling, not a polite chime, a full-throated brass handbell wielded by the head housekeeper who is walking down the narrow corridor between sleeping bodies with all the mercy of a drill sergeant and twice the volume. You jolt awake in complete darkness, Ed. We're talking complete darkness here, the kind of pitch black that makes you question whether you've gone blind or simply died in your sleep. November frost has crept through the gaps in the roof tiles, and your breath comes out in visible clouds even though you're buried under every scrap of wool and linen you own. The other scullery maids are groaning, coughing, fumbling for their caps and aprons in the blackness. Someone's crying softly in the corner, probably the new girl who arrived last week from some tenant farm and still hasn't adjusted to the brutal schedule. You'd feel sorry for her, but honestly, you're too cold and too tired to feel much of anything except a dull resentment toward the entire social order. Historians still argue whether servant life in country manors was genuinely worse than in urban households, but right now, as your bare feet hit the icy floorboards, you're pretty sure you drew the short straw either way. You dress in stages, layering on your shift, your wool petticoat, your bodice, your work apron, all of it, previously worn, none of it particularly clean, because laundry day is a whole production you can't afford to waste on your own clothing when the family's linens demand priority. The garret smells like unwashed bodies, chamber pot fumes, and that peculiar mustiness of old straw that's been slept on by too many people for too many months. Somewhere, a rat scuttles across a rafter. You've stopped being afraid of rats. They're just roommates now, really, and honestly less annoying than some of the footmen. The bell ringer lets call her Mistress Judith, because every manor has a Mistress Judith who exists solely to make your life miserable. He's already moving toward the men's quarters in the opposite wing. You can hear her shouting something about idle hands and the devil's work, which is ironic considering the only devil around here seems to be her. The social hierarchy of a 17th century manor household is meticulously structured, with the lord and lady at the top, the steward and housekeeper just below them, and then descending ranks of upper servants, lower servants, and outdoor workers all the way down to you, scullery maid, bottom of the barrel, the person who scrubs pots until your knuckles bleed and nobody even knows your name. You shuffle toward the servants' staircase, narrow, dark, treacherous, gripping the rope banister, because these stairs have already claimed 2 twisted ankles this year, and you can't afford to be the third. The house is starting to wake in layers. You can hear the kitchen fires being stoked somewhere below, the crack and pop of kindling catching. A groom is already in the courtyard cursing at a horse. From the family wing, absolutely nothing, because the gentry won't stir for another 4 hours at least, luxuriating in their feather beds and embroidered hangings while you prepare their entire world. Here's a fun, quirky fact that'll make you feel better about your own life. Many 17th century servant contracts specified that maids could be docked wages for oversleeping, breaking dishes, or impudent behavior, which basically meant looking at someone wrong. You are, essentially, one bad mood away from financial ruin at all times. Sweet dreams. You reach the kitchen-y beating heart of the manor, the source of all heat and food and chaos, and the real work begins. But that part comes next. For now, in this transitional moment between sleep and labor, you're just another shadow in the darkness, another body moving through the pre-dawn cold, wondering if your life will ever contain something more than bells and frost and the endless grinding cycle of serving people who will never know your name. The kitchen is already a war zone. 3 massive hearths dominate the space zone for roasting, one for boiling, one for baking, and all 3 are roaring with fires that someone, probably the undermaid who got here even earlier than you, poor soul, has been nursing since 3:30. The heat hits you like a wall after the freezing garret, and for about 10 seconds it feels glorious. Then you start sweating under all those wool layers, and remember that you'll be sweating for the next 16 hours straight. The head cooker woman, built like a beer barrel, with the temperament of a wounded bear, is already shouting orders in a regional accent so thick you sometimes wonder if she's speaking actual English or some kind of kitchen-specific battle language. She's pointing at you with a wooden spoon that's seen violence. You, porridge, now. Kettles, move. You don't argue. Nobody argues with cook. Last month the footman made a sarcastic comment about undersalted mutton, and she chased him through 3 corridors with a cleaver. You haul yourself toward the porridge station, which involves 2 enormous iron pots suspended over the boiling hearth on a complex system of hooks and chains. The oats have already been set to soak overnight, a mixture of coarse oatmeal, water, and a bit of small beer, because straight water from the well is a gamble with dysentery that nobody's willing to take. Your job is to keep these pots stirring so the porridge doesn't scorch on the bottom, while simultaneously trying not to burn your face off from the heat radiating upward in waves. Historians still argue whether manor kitchens were safer or more dangerous than urban cookshops, but standing here with flames licking up around cast iron and zero safety regulations, you're pretty confident the answer is dangerous as hell either way. Open fires, boiling liquids, sharp knives everywhere, and a complete absence of modern burn treatment beyond rub some butter on it and pray. Every cook you know is missing fingers or sporting some horrific scar from their years in service. To your left, the dairymaid is in fact sobbing quietly while churning butter. She's about 15, red-faced, and apparently did something to earn cook's wrath earlier. Maybe the butter didn't come together properly, maybe she broke a crock, maybe she just existed too loudly. In the rigid social hierarchy of a manor household kitchen, dairymaids rank slightly above scullery maids but well below the pastry specialist, and everyone takes out their frustrations on whoever's below them. It's a trickle-down economy of misery. You stir the porridge in steady figure eights, watching the thick, greyish mass bubble and plop. This isn't the refined, steel-cut oats with cinnamon and honey that the family will eat in their chambers. This is bulk fuel for servants. About 20 people need to be fed before the household can function, and every one of them will eat this same bland mush with maybe a scrape of drippings if they're lucky. The smell is earthy and faintly sour. Not unpleasant exactly, just relentlessly boring. You've eaten this porridge every morning for 3 years. You'll eat it every morning until you die or get married or flee to London, whichever comes first. Around you, the kitchen has become a symphony of controlled chaos. The spit boy is already setting up the roasting mechanisms for later. You can hear the creak of the turnspits being tested. Someone's chopping onions with the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk of a very sharp knife meeting wood. The pastry specialist, who considers herself basically gentry compared to the rest of you, is rolling dough for the family's breakfast manchette, bread-fine white flour, the expensive stuff, while servants get maslin made from mixed grains that sits in your stomach like a rock. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Many 17th century manor kitchens kept a perpetual pottage, pot that was never fully emptied, just continuously added to for servants' meals. Bones, vegetables, stale bread, whatever it, all went in, creating a constantly evolving stew that might contain ingredients from 3 weeks ago. Waste not, want not, and also definitely don't think too hard about what you're eating. The head housekeeper sweeps through on her rounds, inspecting everything with the gimlet eye of someone who knows every corner-cutting trick because she invented half of them. She pauses at your porridge pot, peers in, nods curtly. You've passed inspection. The dairymaid gets a sharp word about her posture. The pastry girl gets a reminder about the family's breakfast tray timing. Then she's gone, a rustle of keys and authority, off to terrorize some other part of the household. You're sweating heavily now. The fire's heat is relentless, and you can feel your shift sticking to your back under all the layers. Your arms ache from the constant stirring. These pots are massive, and the porridge is thick, but you don't dare stop because scorched porridge means cook's wrath, and cook's wrath means potentially losing your position, and losing your position means what, exactly? Back to your family's tenant farm where your father can barely feed the children he already has? The workhouse? Prostitution? The options for a working-class 17th century woman are pretty much servant or worse servant situations, with a side of maybe marriage if you're extraordinarily lucky. The main historical fact here is that feeding a manor household was a staggering logistical operation. A middling country estate might house 20 to 40 people at any given time, all of whom needed multiple meals daily, and without refrigeration, that meant daily bread baking, constant fire management, and preserving foods through salting, smoking, and pickling on an industrial scale. You're part of a well-oiled machine, even if the machine runs on exploitation and class hierarchy. Someone rings the servant's breakfast bell. Ha! Time to dish up. You ladle the porridge into wooden bowls, watching servants file in order of rank. Upper servants first, then craftsmen, then agricultural workers, then finally you and your fellow scullery maids, scraping up whatever's left. You eat standing up, fast, because there's a mountain of breakfast dishes about to need washing, and chamber pots need emptying, and the gentry are still asleep upstairs in their comfortable ignorance. Welcome to the glamorous world of country manor life. Try not to get scolded. You've barely swallowed your last spoonful of porridge when the head housekeeper appears in the kitchen doorway like a pinch-faced ghost and points directly at you. Upstairs, ladies' chamber. Mary's got the ague and someone needs to attend. Your stomach drops. You're a scullery maid. Your job is pots and floors and things that don't talk back. But Mary is the lady's personal maid, and when the lady's personal maid is sick, the hierarchy collapses downward like a terrible game of musical chairs, and suddenly you're being thrust into the intimate personal service of a woman who probably doesn't know you exist. You wipe your hands on your apron, already grimy, great start, and follow the housekeeper through the servants' passages, those narrow corridors that run like veins behind the grand rooms, allowing servants to appear and disappear like magic. The family wing is a different world. Tapestries on the walls, Turkish carpets. The smell shifts from kitchen smoke and onions to beeswax and something floral, probably lavender sachets tucked into the linens. You feel profoundly out of place, like a barn cat smuggled into a cathedral. The housekeeper briefs you in urgent whispers outside the lady's chamber door. Empty the pot, lay out her shift and stays. Get the fire going. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Do not touch anything you're not explicitly told to touch. And for the love of God, don't drop the chamber pot. She looks at you with deep skepticism, clearly regretting this assignment already, then opens the door and shoves you inside. The room is dark, stuffy, and smells like sleep. That particular mixture of human bodies, old perfume, and the faint sourness of chamber pot that hasn't been emptied since last night. Heavy curtains block the windows. The bed is a massive four-poster affair with embroidered hangings drawn closed, a fabric fortress protecting the lady from drafts, demons, and the sight of servants like you. You can hear gentle snoring from within. Somewhere in that cocoon of privilege is your employer, still dead asleep while you've been up for hours. You tiptoe toward the fireplace first. The embers from last night have died completely. Nobody's restoked it yet, so you kneel on the hearth and start the delicate process of building a new fire from kindling without creating too much noise. Historians still argue whether bedchamber fires were kept burning all night or relit each morning, but in your experience it depends entirely on how cold it is and how much the Lord wants to spend on firewood. November mornings like this, the fire dies and you rebuild it. Your hands are practiced, efficient. Small sticks in a pyramid, tinder tucked underneath, a glowing coal borrowed from the warming pan you carried upstairs, gentle blowing until flames catch. Now comes the part you've been dreading, the chamber pot. It's positioned on the lady's side of the bed because, yes, the lord and lady sleep in the same bed, though in really wealthy households they'd have separate chambers. This is a middling manor, so they share, which means you get to navigate around the snoring lump that is the master, while extracting a ceramic pot full of his wife's nighttime business. You crouch down, peering under the bed curtain, and there it is, a decorated pot with hand-painted flowers, because even human waste gets to be fancy when you're gentry. You grip the handles carefully, lift with your legs like you're defusing a bomb, and begin the long, slow walk toward the door. The pot is heavy. The contents slosh. You're sweating again. imagining the absolute catastrophe of tripping, spilling, the lady's scream, your immediate dismissal, your family's disappointment. But you make it out the door, down the servants' passage, to the garderobe chute where you can dump this horror into the cesspit below. The smell hits you, even through your wool sleeve pressed against your nose. You've smelled worse, but not by much. Here's your quirky fact. Wealthy households sometimes sold their human waste to tanners and dyers who used urine in their chemical processes. So that chamber pot you just emptied? In some manners, it's actually a revenue stream. Capitalism finds a way, even in the 17th century toilet economy. Back in the chamber fire crackling nicely, now you open the curtains just enough to let in weak morning light. The lady stirs. You freeze! She's a woman in her mid-30s, which in this era means she's probably been pregnant 7 or 8 times, buried 3 children, and has the worn look of someone who's survived multiple childbirths without anesthesia. Her hair is hidden under a linen sleeping cap. Her face is pale, unpowdered, shockingly ordinary, without the social armour of cosmetics and styling. "Is that you, Mary?" Her voice is thick with sleep. "No, my lady, Mary is ill. I'm helping." You keep your eyes down. She sighs, accepting this without comment, and sits up. "My shift then." And stays. "And tell someone to bring chocolate." You lay out her fresh linen shift embroidered at the cuffs, because of course it is, and her stays, those structural linen corsets that will shape her torso into the fashionable silhouette. She stands, letting her nightgown drop without self-consciousness, because you're essentially furniture to her. You've seen naked gentry before, but it never stops being weird, this intimate exposure combined with complete emotional distance. Dressing a 17th century gentlewoman is an art form. The shift goes on first. Yow! Then the stays, which you lace up the back with practiced pulls, creating the smooth, conical shape that fashion demands. Then the petticoat, then the gown today. It's a wool day dress in deep bluethen, the sleeves tied on separately, because gowns and sleeves are different components in this era's modular fashion system. Your fingers work the hooks, the laces, the pins. She stands passive as a dressmaker's dummy. The main historical fact, personal hygiene in the 17th century was radically different from modern standards. Full immersion bathing was rare and considered medically dangerous. Instead, people practiced dry cleaning, changing their linen undergarments frequently if wealthy, and wiping exposed skin with cloths. Your lady hasn't bathed in weeks, possibly months. The linen absorbs her body's oils and odours, and changing it daily is what passes for cleanliness. From your perspective, 6 inches away, lacing her stays, she smells like old rose water, sweat, and that musty scent of wool that's been worn too long. Now the truly delicate part, her hair and wig selection. She removes her sleeping cap, revealing hair that's been pinned up overnight. It's thinning. Another joy of multiple pregnancies and poor nutrition, so she wears hairpieces and wigs for public appearances. You bring the wig stand closer. She selects the modest daytime option, dark curls arranged simply, not the towering confection she'd wear for formal occasions. You settle the wig on her head, pin it carefully, and try not to think about the fact that this hair came from some poor woman, probably dead, possibly diseased, who sold it to a wig maker for survival money. The things we don't discuss in polite society could fill volumes. She's transformed now. Lady of the manor, respectable, proper, ready to command her household. She waves you away dismissively. You curtsy awkward, unpracticed, probably wrong, and escape back to your proper world of pots and grime, where at least nobody expects you to handle their hair. You're barely back in the kitchen, hoping to disappear into the familiar chaos of pot scrubbing when the chapel bell begins its imperious clanging. Morning prayers. Mandatory. The entire household, every servant, every groom, every field worker who's not actively preventing livestock from dying is required to gather in the great hall for the chaplain's daily dose of spiritual improvement. You glance longingly at the mountain of breakfast dishes waiting in the scullery, but the housekeeper is already herding everyone toward the hall like a sheepdog with a superiority complex. The great hall is the manor's ceremonial heart, a cavernous space with a hammer-beam ceiling, faded tapestries depicting biblical scenes you can't quite make out in the dim light, and a floor of cold stone that seems specifically designed to punish kneeling. The family isn't even here. They get to finish dressing in comfort while you shiver in formation. Servants line up along the walls in strict hierarchical order, steward and housekeeper closest to the dais where the family will sit, then upper servants, then skilled workers, then you and your fellow lower servants pressed against the back wall like an afterthought. The stone floor is cold. This cannot be overstated. It's November. There's no fire in here because heating a space this large would bankrupt the estate, and the cold radiates up through your thin shoes, which are really more like reinforced slippers, and into your bones. You shift your weight from foot to foot, trying to preserve whatever warmth you generated in the kitchen, but it's a losing battle. Around you, other servants are doing the same shuffling dance. Someone coughs a wet, consumptive sound that echoes in the high ceiling. You make a mental note to stand farther from them tomorrow because the last thing you need is to catch whatever's going around. The family finally processes in. The master, the lady freshly wigged and corseted, thanks to your recent labours, their 3 surviving children ranging from age 5 to 14, and the master's widowed sister who lives here as a permanent dependent. They settle onto cushioned chairs on the raised dais. You notice the master's face is already florid, probably from the morning ale he drinks before even getting dressed, and he looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Same, honestly. The chaplain emerges from the side door in his black robes, looking appropriately sombre and self-important. He's a younger son from a gentry family, educated enough for the church but not important enough for a real parish, so he's stuck here providing spiritual guidance to people who largely ignore him except during these mandatory twice-a-daily prayer sessions. Historians still argue whether household chaplains wielded significant influence in country manners or were basically decorative religious furniture, but from where you're standing, he seems pretty powerless except for his ability to make these gatherings last forever. "Let us pray," he intones, and everyone drops to their knees in a rustling wave of wool and linen. Your knees hit the stone with a crack that reverberates through your entire skeleton. This is going to hurt. Double. Morning prayers typically run 20 to 30 minutes. Psalms, readings from the Book of Common Prayer, a brief homily that's never actually brief, and you'll spend the entire time kneeling on unforgiving stone while your joints scream and your mind wanders to literally anything else. The dairymaid next to you, remember her from earlier, the sobbing one, is already tearing up again, though whether from religious fervour or knee pain is unclear. The chaplain launches into Psalm 95. O come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. His voice is reedy and nasal, and he has this particular way of emphasizing random words that makes everything sound vaguely threatening. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and make a joyful noise unto him with peace psalms. You mouth the words automatically, having heard this exact psalm approximately 900 times. Your mind drifts. You're mentally reviewing the pot scrubbing strategy for the breakfast dishes. There's a particularly scorched kettle that's going to need sand and elbow grease. Maybe if you heat it first, soak it with lye soap. For the Lord is a great God, the chaplain continues, really leaning into that emphasis, and a great king above all gods. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Household prayers were a legal requirement for English gentry under various 17th century church regulations, part of the broader expectation that landowners would maintain religious order among their dependents. The master of the house could actually be fined for failing to ensure his household attended daily prayers. So this isn't just piety, it's compliance with social and legal expectations. You're all here because the government said so. Your knees are transitioning from painful to possibly permanent damage. You try shifting your weight slightly, but there's no good position. The stone is relentless. The stone is relentless. You can feel every irregularity in the floor through your kneecaps. Someone behind you sounds like one of the stable voices, definitely falling asleep because you can hear tiny snores starting. Brave or stupid, you're not sure which. The chaplain moves to his homily, which today is apparently about the sin of idleness. Rich, considering the family sitting on cushions while lecturing the people who've been working since 4 a.m. The devil finds work for idle hands, he warns, his voice rising with manufactured passion. We must be, ever, vigilant against the temptations of sloth. You zone out again. The master is clearly also zoning out his eyes, have that glazed look of someone mentally calculating grain yields or planning the afternoon hunt. The lady is maintaining a pose of attentive piety, but you served her this morning and you know she's probably thinking about household accounts or which neighbour to invite for supper. The children are fidgeting except the eldest son, who's attempting to look mature and devout and mostly succeeding at looking constipated. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some household chaplains were notorious for being unable to find other employment due to drinking problems, gambling debts, or scandalous behaviour, so country manors became a kind of clerical dumping ground for the church's problem cases. Your chaplain might be here because he's devout and scholarly, or he might be here because he got caught with the bishop's daughter. You'll never know which, and honestly, it doesn't affect how much your knees hurt. Finally, the chaplain reaches the closing blessing. May the Lord bless us and keep us. May the Lord make his face to shine upon us. Everyone murmurs amen, with the fervent relief of people who've survived a minor torture session. The family rises from their comfortable chairs. The household struggles to standing positions, many people hobbling on legs that have gone numb or cramped. You make it upright on the third attempt, grabbing the wall for support. Your knees feel like they've aged 40 years in 30 minutes. The dairymaid is openly limping. One of the field workers has to be helped up by his companions. Welcome to spiritual improvement, 17th century style, mandatory, uncomfortable, and mainly serving as a reminder of who has power and who has stone floors. The family processes out first, naturally, then the upper servants, then everyone else in a shuffling exodus toward their respective duties. You head back to the kitchen, back to those waiting dishes, back to the familiar world where at least the pain in your hands comes from honest work instead than enforced piety. You'll do this all again tonight at evening prayers. Can't wait. The family breakfasts in their private chambers naturally, because eating with servants would be roughly equivalent to dining with livestock in their worldview. You won't see what they eat, but you know because you helped prepare it. Manchet bread made from bolted white flour, butter from yesterday's churning cold roast capon left from last night's supper, a pot of chocolate for the lady shipped from the Americas at shocking expense, and small beer that's been specially brewed to a lighter strength for morning consumption. Their breakfast is a leisure activity, eaten at 8 or 9 o'clock after they've slept in, dressed properly, and perhaps read some correspondence. Your breakfast, as we've already established, was grey porridge eaten standing up at 5:30 in the morning. But the fascinating, and by fascinating, I mean soul-crushing reality, is that breakfast hierarchy doesn't just divide gentry from servants. It divides servants from servants in a meticulously calibrated system of food-based social signalling that would make a modern HR department weep. The upper servant's steward, housekeeper, the master's valet, the lady's maid when she's not sicky-ate in the steward's room, a small parlour adjacent to the main household offices. They get the same porridge base as you, but theirs comes with actual butter stirred in, sometimes honey if the estate's hides produced well, and slices of maslin bread that's at least been baked fresh this morning. They drink small beer from pewter mugs instead of wooden cups. They sit at a table with actual chairs. They use spoons that aren't shared with 5 other people. This is the breakfast of the aspirational middle management class, people who've climbed far enough up the household ladder to have utensils and dignity. Below them, the skilled craftsmen and upper outdoor workers, the head groom, the gamekeeper, the estate carpenter eat in a separate section of the kitchen itself, at the long servants' table that gets scrubbed down after meals and used for food prep the rest of the day. Their porridge is plain, but their portions are generous because physical labour demands calories. They get the crusts and ends from yesterday's bread, which sounds grim, but is actually a significant upgrade from no bread at all. Historians still argue whether manor households deliberately stratified food quality to reinforce hierarchy, or whether it emerged organically from resource scarcity, but the effect is the same. Everyone knows exactly where they stand based on what's in their bowl. You and your fellow scullery maids, along with the spit boys, the lowliest stable hands, and anyone else at the absolute bottom of the social ladder, eat whatever's left after everyone else has been served. Sometimes that's adequate. Sometimes that's scraping the burnt bits from the bottom of the porridge pot and calling it breakfast. You eat in the scullery or the corridor or wherever you can find a flat surface, balanced on stools or crates or your own haunches. You share spoons, you drink from a communal pitcher, and you do it fast, because your work is never done and nobody's going to wait for you to finish chewing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Food allocation in early modern households was so rigidly controlled that many estates kept detailed accounts of who received what rations, down to the ounce of bread and pint of beer. This wasn't just about feeding people, it was about maintaining social order through calculated scarcity and abundance. The steward literally had ledgers tracking that the butler got 6 ounces of white bread while you got 4 ounces of brown, because hierarchy must be legible even in carbohydrate form. But here's where it gets particularly insulting. The butler third guy whose main job is managing the beer cellar and the plate pantry yats better than almost anyone except the family. Why? Because he's in constant proximity to the master, serves at the family table, and thus must be presentable, which apparently requires superior nutrition. His breakfast includes white bread, cold meat, cheese, and beer that's actually good instead of the sour small beer the rest of you choke down. He eats in the buttery, his own little kingdom, surrounded by the barrels and bottles he controls with almost feudal authority. You've seen him at breakfast exactly once, when you were sent to fetch a specific wine bottle for some emergency. He was sitting there like a minor nobleman, cutting cheese with a personal knife, chewing contemplatively, completely unhurried. He looked at you like you were a smudge on his otherwise perfect morning. You wanted to dump the porridge pot over his head. You didn't, because unemployment, but you wanted to. The resentment this breeds is palpable. You can feel it in the kitchen every morning, in the way the lower servants watch the upper servants collect their butter ration, in the bitter jokes about his lordship the butler and his precious white bread. Class warfare isn't some abstract concept tides happening in real time over breakfast portions, and it's vicious. Last month, 2 chambermaids got into a physical fight over who got the last slice of yesterday's manchet that had been relegated to servants' hall. Hair was pulled, the housekeeper had to intervene. All over bread. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households employed food tasters who sampled the family's meals before service to check for poison, but this practice was dying out by the 17th century, except in the most paranoid aristocratic circles. However, the fear of poison remained, which is why butlers and other upper servants who handled food were paid significantly more and given better, rations partly as incentive for loyalty, partly as compensation for the theoretical risk of accidentally eating poisoned roast capon. The children of the family eat separately from their parents, in a nursery setting with a governess or tutor supervising. Their breakfast is carefully calibrated to their age and status. Milk pottage for the youngest, bread and butter for the older ones, watered wine instead of beer, because apparently wine is more refined even when you dilute it to the point of uselessness. The heir, the eldest son, currently 14, and already insufferable, gets portions that mirror his father's breakfast, a symbolic rehearsal for his future role as master. You know all this because you washed their dishes too, and the waste from the nursery meals could feed half the scullery for a day. Spatial hierarchy extends beyond just food quality to where people are allowed to eat. The family in their chambers, upper servants in the steward's room, skilled workers at the kitchen table, you in the margins, the leftovers of space consuming the leftovers of food. And here's the thing, everyone accepts this as natural, as divinely ordained even. The chaplain's homilies regularly reinforce that social hierarchy reflects God's plan, that challenging your station is challenging God himself. But standing here in the scullery, gnawing on a crust of muslin bread that's gone slightly mouldy on one edge, you just tear that part off. It's fine. Watching the butler walk past with his personal breakfast tray like he's the bloody King of England, you can't help but think that maybe God's plan could use some revisions. The breakfast hour ends. Dishes pile uppiter from the steward's room, wooden bowls from the kitchen table, the family's delicate pottery from upstairs. Everything flows toward you, toward the scullery, toward the endless cycle of washing and scrubbing. That is your life. At least the porridge was warm. Small mercies. While you're elbow deep in greasy dishwater, the real power of the manor is conducting business in the estate office, a wood-panelled room that smells like leather, ink, and the particular mustiness of old account books. The stewardlet's calling, "Mr. Bartholomew, because every steward is named something appropriately boring and authoritative as the master's right-hand man, the person who actually runs this place while the master cosplays as a country gentleman. You rarely interact with him directly, but his presence looms over the household like a well-organized storm cloud. Mr. Bartholomew arrived at his office at 6 o'clock this morning, which means he's been working for 3 hours already, while the master was still snoring in his embroidered bed hangings. The steward's morning rounds are a carefully choreographed performance of administrative control, reviewing accounts, meeting with tenants, inspecting estate infrastructure, and generally preventing the whole operation from collapsing into agricultural chaos. He's part accountant, part judge, part diplomat, and part enforcer, and he takes none of these roles lightly. His desk is a landscape of paperwork. Rental ledgers showing which tenants have paid, which are behind, and which are about to be evicted. Expense accounts tracking every shilling spent on candles, beer, grain, livestock, wages. Correspondence from the master's lawyer in London about some property dispute. A list of repairs needed on tenant cottages which will be ignored until something actually collapses. And sitting ominously in the corner, the estate court roll the record of Manor court proceedings where Mr. Bartholomew acts as judge, jury, and occasionally executioner of local justice. Historians still argue whether stewards in the 17th century were trusted partners to the gentry or merely professional hired help, but the reality is they occupied a weird, liminal, space-educated, powerful, essential, yet still ultimately employees who could be dismissed if they displeased the master. Mr. Bartholomew has a university education, probably Cambridge or Oxford, which means he reads Latin and knows more about agricultural law than the master ever will. But he still bows when the master enters the room. It's a strange life, being indispensable but not quite respectable. The morning's first petitioner is already waiting, a tenant farmer named John, who's 2 months behind on rent because his cow died and his wife just had their 7th child. You can hear the conversation drifting down the corridor because Mr. Bartholomew's office door is open and sound travels in these old stone buildings like water through cracks. John is explaining, pleading really, his voice rough with desperation and too much outdoor work. The steward's voice is measured, professional, utterly unmoved. You had a cow. You should have had savings. The rent is 40 shillings per annum, John, payable quarterly. You're in arrears. I can give you until Michaelmas to pay what you owe, but if you default again, I'll have no choice but to recommend eviction to the master. There's a silence. You imagine John's face weathered, exhausted, calculating whether he can possibly earn 8 shillings in the next few weeks. Spoiler, he probably can't. The steward knows this. John knows. The steward knows this. Everyone's just performing their roles in a script that's been running since the feudal era. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Estate stewards typically received both cash wages and significant perquisites-free housing in a cottage on the estate, food from the manor kitchen at the upper servants' level, sometimes a small parcel of land to farm for themselves. They were well compensated precisely because they held enormous power over the estate's financial health. A corrupt or incompetent steward could bankrupt the landowner through embezzlement, bad deals, or simple mismanagement. Trust was everything, which is why these positions often passed from father to son within families known for loyalty. Next comes the gamekeeper, who has news that makes the steward's morning infinitely more complicated. They caught a poacher. Specifically, they caught young Thomas from the village taking rabbits from the estate's warren using snares, which is both theft and a violation of the game laws, which in turn means this is now a legal matter that requires the steward's attention and possibly the local magistrate's involvement. Poaching is a constant thorn in every estate's side. The gentry have legal monopoly on hunting game deer, rabbits, game birds, but the rural poor are hungry and the estate's forests are right there, full of meat that's technically illegal to eat but very easy to catch if you're clever. The moral calculus is simple. From the poacher's perspective, my family is starving, those rabbits aren't hurting anyone, the Lord has more food than he can possibly eat. From the steward's perspective, property rights must be defended, the law is the law, and if we let one person poach, everyone will poach, and then where's the social order? Mr. Bartholomew rubs his temples. He knows Thomas. Everyone knows Tomashi's 19, not particularly bright, has a pregnant wife and a sick mother. Prosecuting him means dragging him before the magistrate, who is probably the master himself or a neighbouring gentleman, which could result in fines. Thomas absolutely cannot pay, transportation to the colonies, or in extreme cases, hanging over rabbits. But not prosecuting him means appearing weak, encouraging more poaching, and potentially angering the master who's particular about his hunting rights. It's a lose-lose situation dressed up as land management. Bring him to Manor Court next week, the steward decides. We'll fine him 5 shillings and give him a warning. If he's caught again, we prosecute properly. The gamekeeper nods and leaves. Thomas will somehow have to find 5 shillings, probably by selling everything his family owns, and he'll still go back to poaching because hunger doesn't care about legal consequences. The steward knows this. The system grinds on regardless. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some 17th century stewards kept secret discretionary funds for exactly these situations, money they could use to quietly pay a poacher's fine themselves if they thought prosecution would create more problems than it solved, or to give loans to struggling tenants that were never actually expected to be repaid. It was a way of maintaining order through selective mercy, off the books, never acknowledged. Whether Mr. Bartholomew has such a fund, you'll never know. That's the kind of thing that doesn't make it into official records. The morning continues, a dispute between 2 tenants over boundary stones in their fields, a request from the village blacksmith to rent additional pasture for his horse, a report on the state of the mill dam which needs repairs before winter flooding. Each matter requires the steward's judgment, his signature in the ledgers, his careful balance between the master's interests and the estate's long-term stability. By mid-morning, Mr. Bartholomew will have dealt with a dozen small crises, prevented 3 major ones, and created approximately 1 new enemy among the tenancy. It's exhausting work, and the only people who appreciate it are other stewards, because everyone else just sees the rent collector and the enforcer of rules. You catch glimpses of him throughout the morning as he walks, the estate inspecting the barns, checking on the livestock, examining a roof that's apparently leaking. He moves with purpose, a leather-bound notebook in hand, recording everything. In his head he's calculating grain yields, livestock values, repair costs, wage expenditures, projected income, potential losses. The Manor is a business, and he's the CEO who never gets credit when things go well but catches all the blame when they don't. Welcome to management 17th century style. The spreadsheets are handwritten, the HR complaints are called tenant petitions, and employee termination means actual homelessness. At least nobody's asking him to empty chamber pots. While the steward manages the estate's external machinery, crops, legal disputes, the lady of the manor rules an entirely separate kingdom, the domestic sphere. And you're about to experience her governance firsthand, because she's descending to the working areas of the house for her morning inspection rounds, and everyone is quietly panicking. The housekeeper appears in the kitchen doorway looking like someone just announced the apocalypse. She's coming. Linen inspection. Move. You abandon your half-scrubbed pot and join the other female servants in a desperate scramble to make everything look less catastrophic than it actually is. Crumbs are swept. Surfaces are wiped. Someone kicks a dead mouse under a cupboard because there's no time to properly dispose of it. The dairymaid is crying again honestly. At this point it's just her default state. The lady sweeps in wearing that blue wool gown you helped lace her into this morning, but she's transformed from the sleepy, ordinary woman you dressed into something far more terrifying, a household manager on a mission. Her keys jangle at her waist, the symbol of her authority, the literal keys to every locked cupboard, every storage room, every place where valuable household goods are kept. In the 17th century, the mistress of the house doesn't just oversee domestic work, she controls access to resources with the jealous precision of a dragon guarding gold. She heads straight for the linen press, a massive oak cupboard in the housekeeper's domain where all the household linens are stored, tablecloths, napkins, bed sheets, towels, and the lady's personal undergarments that are probably worth more than you'll earn in 5 years. The housekeeper unlocks it with trembling hands. The lady begins pulling out items, examining them in the light from the window, running her fingers along seams and checking for stains, wear, or evidence of poor laundering. "This pillowcase," she announces, holding up an offending item, "has a tear. Why was it not mended?" The housekeeper stammers something about the chambermaid's workload. The lady's expression could freeze wine. Workload is not an excuse for slovenly maintenance. Our linens represent our household's respectability. Mend it by evening or the chambermaid's wages are docked. And just like that, someone you've never met is losing money because a pillowcase ripped. Welcome to Trickle-Down Consequences, 17th Century Edition. Historians still argue whether mistresses of country manors were genuinely skilled household managers or merely performing supervisory theatre while the housekeeper did the actual work. But watching her now counting napkins against an inventory list she apparently memorizes, checking that the best damask tablecloths are properly folded with lavender sachets between them, you're pretty sure she knows exactly what she's doing. This is her domain, her expertise, the sphere where she wields real power, even if the legal world considers her property of her husband. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wealthy women in the 17th century received extensive training in household management from their mothers and through conduct books like Hannah Woolley's The Complete Servant Maid or Gervase Markham's The English Housewife. They were expected to know medicine, food preservation, textile production, servant supervision, and account keeping. The lady of the manor wasn't decorative. She was running a complex domestic economy that could employ dozens of people and process thousands of pounds worth of goods annually. Next, she moves to the still room, her personal laboratory where medicines, preserves, and cosmetics are prepared. This is her private kingdom, technically off limits to everyone except the still room maid who works under her direct supervision. The room smells like a collision between an apothecary and a kitchen, dried herbs hanging from rafters, jars of mysterious liquids, mortars and pestles, receipt books, recipe books, but for medicine and cosmetics filled with her handwritten notes. She inspects her current projects, a batch of rosewater distilling in glass alembics, quince preserves cooling in ceramic pots, and an ointment for skin conditions that apparently requires badger fat and at least 7 herbs you can't pronounce. She tastes the preserves with a small spoon, nods approval, then notices that someone, probably the still room maid, has left a jar uncovered. Uncovered preserves invite contamination, she says, her voice sharp. We waste nothing in this household. Cover everything properly, or don't bother making it at all. The still room maid, who's probably 16 and terrified, bobs a curtsy and mumbles apologies. The lady has already moved on to checking her stock of medicinal supplies, willow bark for fever, comfrey for wounds, chamomile for digestion, and a locked cabinet containing the dangerous substances, mercury compounds, arsenic-based cosmetics, opium tinctures that only she's allowed to handle. She's essentially the household's doctor, pharmacist, and cosmetics chemist all rolled into one, and she takes this responsibility seriously because infant mortality, disease, and the general medical incompetence of the era mean she's often the only thing standing between her family and death. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many gentlewomen kept secret receipt books containing their most prized formulas for medicines, cosmetics, and special dishes, and these books were passed down as valuable inheritances to daughters. Some recipes were coded or written in personal shorthand to prevent servants from stealing trade secrets. Your lady probably has remedies in that locked still room that she'd never share with anyone, including her own husband, because knowledge is power, and even in marriage women guarded what little power they possessed. She continues her rounds, the dairy to check butter production, she tastes it, pronounces it acceptable but not excellent, suggests the dairy maid adjust the tuning time, the pantry to verify that last week's bread hasn't moulded, it has slightly, and someone's getting scolded, the beer cellar where she consults with the butler about current stocks, they're running low on the good ale, she notes, time to brew another batch. Everywhere she goes, servants straighten their backs, stop talking, and radiate nervous energy. She's not cruel exactly, but she's exacting, demanding, and utterly uninterested in excuses. Her standards are impossibly high because her reputation and, by extension, the family's social standing depends on maintaining a household that runs smoothly, looks prosperous, and never, ever shows cracks in its veneer of genteel competence. You're back in the kitchen when she arrives there, surveying the organised chaos of meal preparation with a critical eye. Cooked stiffens. The pastry girl freezes mid-roll. The lady walks to the hearth, peers into the pot where something's simmering for the main dinner, and God help you all, she tastes it. There's a terrible pause. Then, more salt, and the meat seems tough. Next time, marinate it longer before roasting. She sets down the spoon and leaves without waiting for a response. Cook's face is purple with suppressed rage, but she says nothing because the lady is right, the meat is tough, and everyone knows it. That's the infuriating thing about her inspections. She's usually correct. By the time the lady finishes her morning rounds, she's identified 17 problems, given 12 direct orders, and struck fear into the hearts of approximately 30 staff members. She'll spend the rest of her morning in her chamber doing accounts, recording expenditures, planning menus, writing letters to suppliers about linen orders or spice shipments. She rules her domain with terrifying efficiency, and you still have to curtsy every time you see her. The lady's inspection is over, which means you can return to your actual work, the endless, grinding physical labor that defines your existence. And first on the list, because of course it ices hauling water. Much water. An incomprehensible amount of water. If you had to guess, you'd say you personally carry about 50 gallons of water per day, which is roughly 400 pounds of liquid sloshing in wooden buckets that dig grooves into your shoulders and make your back scream for mercy. The well is in the courtyard, about 60 yards from the kitchen. You make this trip roughly 20 times before noon. Water for cooking, water for washing dishes, water for the laundry, which happens in a separate building and requires its own small ocean, water for the scullery, water for filling the ewers in the bedchambers upstairs. Every drop has to be manually hauled from underground, cranked up in a bucket, transferred to your carrying buckets, and transported to wherever it's needed. There are no pipes, no taps, no magical infrastructure. Just you, your aching shoulders, and the well that never runs dry, but also never gets any closer to the kitchen no matter how many times you walk this path. The courtyard is muddy from last night's rain. Your shoe sand. Let's be generous calling them shoes, because they're really just leather bags tied around your feet squelched through the muck. You pass the stable boy mucking out stalls, the groom leading a horse to the farrier, a delivery cart bringing supplies from town. Everyone's working. Everyone's always working. The whole manor is a machine powered by human bodies instead of coal or steam, and you're one of the interchangeable parts grinding away until you break. You crank the well handle, listen to the rope creak, haul up the dripping bucket, and transfer water into your 2 carrying buckets. They're yoked across your shoulders on a wooden pole, a design that's supposed to distribute weight evenly but actually just means both shoulders hurt equally. You hoist the yoke, feel your knees protest, and begin the trudge back to the kitchen. Water sloshes. Your back protests. You try not to think about the fact that you'll do this exact action approximately 4,000 more times before you die. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Before widespread adoption of indoor plumbing in the 19th century, water hauling was one of the most labor-intensive aspects of household maintenance, and it fell almost exclusively to the lowest-ranking servants, usually young women. Studies of servant skeletons from this era show distinctive bone stress markers on the shoulders, spine, and feet, physical evidence of carrying heavy loads over long distances throughout their working lives. Your body is literally being reshaped by this labor, vertebra by vertebra. Back in the kitchen, you dump your water into the massive copper cistern used for washing. It takes 6 trips just to fill this thing. You're on trip 3. Your shoulder is developing a blister where the yoke rubs. You consider rebellion, escape, literally anything else, but then remember, you have nowhere to go and no skills beyond pot scrubbing, so you pick up the empty buckets and head back to the well, again and again and again. Meanwhile, other servants are tackling equally brutal tasks. In the courtyard, 2 chambermaids are beating carpets and, when I say beating, I mean absolutely assaulting these textiles with wicker carpet beaters, raising clouds of dust that make them cough and wheeze. The carpets are Turkish imports, expensive beyond belief, and they get beaten monthly to remove the accumulated dirt, food crumbs, and general filth of daily life. The chambermaids take turns whacking the suspended carpets with rhythmic thwacks that echo off the courtyard walls. It looks like exercise. It's actually torture disguised as housework. One of them, you think her name is Anna, pauses to catch her breath, and you can see her face is flushed red, her cap askew, dust coating her like she's been working in a flour mill. She sees you with your water buckets and gives a weary nod of solidarity. You're all suffering together. It's almost touching, if touching wasn't a luxury you're too exhausted to appreciate. Upstairs, the chamber pots you emptied this morning have been replaced by freshly used chamber pots because human biology doesn't pause for convenience. Another maid, poor Susan, who drew the short straw today, is making the rounds, collecting these porcelain nightmares and transporting them to the garderobe for disposal. You can track her progress through the house by following the smell and the soft sounds of liquid sloshing in ceramic. She looks dead behind the eyes. You understand completely. Historians still argue whether chamber pot duty was rotated among servants to distribute the misery or assigned permanently to the lowest-ranking individuals as a form of ongoing humiliation, but in your experience, it's a bit of both. Everyone takes a turn eventually, but some people take more turns than others, and those people are invariably the ones with the least social capital to resist. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households used chamber pots made of silver or decorated porcelain as status symbols, because apparently even your toilet needs to broadcast your wealth. There are documented cases of thieves specifically targeting valuable chamber pots during burglaries, which means somewhere in history someone fenced stolen toilet equipment. Class system is weird. You're on water trip number 7 when you pass the laundry building and hear the sounds of textile warfare, the thwack of washing bats beating wet linens, the splash of water in washing tubs, and the creative cursing of the laundresses who are engaged in their weekly battle against dirt. Laundry in the 17th century is a multi-day ordeal involving soaking, beating, boiling, rinsing, wringing, and then drying, all done by hand, all back-breaking, all necessary, because the alternative is everyone wearing filthy clothes and dying of plague. The head laundresser woman with forearms like a blacksmith, and a vocabulary that would make sailors blushies supervising the soaking tubs where linens sit in a mixture of water, wood ash lye, and urine. Yes, urine, it helps break down stains through its ammonia content. Don't think about it too hard. Tomorrow, these will be transferred to boiling cauldrons, beaten with wooden bats to loosen dirt, rinsed in the stream behind the manor, wrung out by 2 women twisting opposite ends, and finally spread on hedges to dry. The whole process will take 3 days and consume the labour of 6 women working full-time. You do not have laundry duty today. Small mercies. Your water buckets are empty again. You're back at the well. Crank, haul, transfer, lift, carry. Your mind goes blank with the repetition. This is meditation for people who can't afford to sit still. You think about nothing, feel everything. The burn in your shoulders, the ache in your lower back, the cold water occasionally sloshing onto your skirt. Somewhere, a clock chimes 10. You've been working for 6 hours. You have approximately 10 more hours to go before you can collapse onto your straw pallet and do this all over again tomorrow. You contemplate escape. Maybe you could run away to London, become a street vendor or a tavern worker or literally anything else. Then you remember the stories about London, the crime, the plague outbreaks, the overcrowding, the fact that orphans freeze to death in gutters. Maybe the well isn't so bad. At least here you get food and shelter, even if both are barely adequate. You haul another load of water, and another, and another. This is your life. This is everyone's life. The endless cycle of labour that keeps civilization functioning while the people actually doing the work remain invisible, interchangeable, and thoroughly unappreciated. The carpets are still being beaten. The chamber pots are still being emptied. The laundry is still being boiled. And you're still hauling water, 1 bucket at a time, until your shoulders give out or you die, whichever comes first. At least the well water is cold. On hot summer days, you sometimes splash a bit on your face when no one's looking. Today you're too cold and too tired even for that small rebellion. While you're hauling your 15th bucket of water and contemplating whether death might be a reasonable alternative to this career path, the master is preparing for his morning leisure activities. And by preparing, I mean his valet is dressing him in riding clothes while he stands there like an expensive mannequin, contributing absolutely nothing to the process, except occasionally lifting an arm when prompted. The contrast is almost funny. Almost. You've been working for 6 hours. He's been awake for maybe 2, and most of that was spent eating breakfast in bed and complaining that the chocolate wasn't hot enough. Now he's going hunting not because the household needs meat. You've got enough salted pork and preserved game to last weeks, but because hunting is what gentlemen do. It's sport. It's social performance. It's a way to demonstrate masculine prowess by shooting birds with expensive firearms, while servants do all the actual work of tracking, retrieving and processing the kill. You catch a glimpse of him through the courtyard as you're making another water run. He's mounted on his favourite horsey beast that eats better than you do and lives in accommodations that are honestly nicer than your garret. He's dressed in a wool riding coat with actual buttons, manufactured in Birmingham and shipped here at considerable expense because heaven forbid he use the humble laces that hold your bodice together, leather gloves and a hat with a feather that probably cost more than your annual wages. He looks every inch the country squire, ready to dominate nature through the advanced technology of paying other people to find animals for him to shoot. The gamekeeper and 2 hunting dogs are already waiting. The master says something jovial. You can't hear what, but his tone is hearty and self-satisfied. They head off toward the estate's woodland, probably to blast some pheasants into oblivion and call it a productive morning. You haul your water buckets in the opposite direction and try not to harbour resentful thoughts about the fundamental injustice of social hierarchies. You fail. The resentful thoughts are very much present. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hunting was legally restricted to landowners and the gentry through game laws that effectively criminalised hunting by common people, even on their own land. These laws weren't primarily about conservation. They were about maintaining social distinction and preventing the lower classes from accessing food sources. A gentleman hunting was exercising his rights. A poor man hunting was committing a crime, punishable by transportation or death. Same activity. Radically different legal and social meaning depending on who's holding the gun. Not all gentry spend their mornings hunting, though. Some prefer intellectual pursuits, which sounds impressive until you realise it mostly means reading letters from other gentlemen complaining about their tenants or studying agricultural improvement pamphlets while having absolutely no intention of implementing anything that might reduce their leisure time. The master's study, which you're allowed to enter exactly once per week, to dust, and even then only under supervision, contains books on animal husbandry, estate management, classical literature, sermons, and a surprising amount of poetry that he definitely doesn't read but keeps around to look cultured. On days when the master doesn't hunt, he might spend his morning in correspondence. Letter writing is a serious business for the gentry. It's how they maintain social networks, conduct business, arrange marriages for their children, and gossip about their neighbours with the kind of vicious detail that would make a modern tabloid proud. His letters are written on expensive paper with a quill pen. You know this because you've seen the bills, and also because you're occasionally sent to the study to fetch fresh ink when he's run out. He seals them with his personal signet ring pressed into hot wax because even his mail needs to broadcast status. Historians still argue whether 17th century gentry were genuinely literate in the modern sense or merely performed literacy through letter writing and book collecting, but the evidence suggests most could read and write competently, if not always elegantly. Your master can definitely write. You've seen his signature on household accounts. Whether he's actually read those leather-bound volumes of classical philosophy is another question entirely. Sometimes books are just expensive furniture. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some country gentlemen belong to informal improvement societies, where they'd meet monthly to discuss agricultural innovations, new crops, and estate management techniques. These societies were basically 17th century TED Talks, a bunch of wealthy men congratulating each other on having progressive ideas while changing absolutely nothing about how their estates actually operated. But hey, at least they felt intellectually engaged. On other mornings, the master receives visitors, neighbouring gentlemen who drop by unannounced because social calling is a complex ritual that nobody's bothered to regulate with something sensible like appointments. You'll know when visitors arrive because suddenly the household shifts into performance mode, the butler rushing to set out the good wine, the housekeeper frantically checking that the receiving rooms look appropriately prosperous, everyone pretending this wasn't a complete surprise even though it absolutely was. These visits often devolve into arguments about local politics, sheep breeding, or whose tenant did what outrageous thing. Last week, the master and his neighbour Sir Thomas spent 2 hours in heated debate about whether crossbred sheep produced better wool than purebreds. 2. hours. About sheep, you know this because you were stationed outside the room in case they needed refreshments, and you stood there for 120 minutes listening to grown men passionately argue about wool quality like it was a matter of national security. The weird thing is, these conversations actually matter in their world. Sheep determine income. Wool prices affect estate profitability. Agricultural choices impact rents, which impact how much the master can spend on those fancy buttons and imported chocolate. It's all connected in a great chain of economic being, and you're at the very bottom of it, carrying water so that theoretically, eventually, through some distant trickle-down effect, the household prospers enough to keep employing you. Sometimes the master spends his morning in estate business with the steward, remember, Mr. Bartholomew from earlier? Reviewing accounts or making decisions about tenant disputes. These sessions are mercifully brief because the master finds details boring and delegates most actual decision-making to the steward anyway. He'll nod authoritatively, say something like, "Carry on, Bartholomew," and then return to his real priorities, hunting, socializing, and maintaining the elaborate fiction that he's personally managing this complex agricultural enterprise. The lady, meanwhile, has finished her household inspections and is probably in her chamber doing needlework or writing letters to female relatives, engaging in the parallel social network that women maintain separately from men's business. Their worlds overlap. They share a bed, a household, children. But they also operate in distinct spheres with different rules, different activities, different ways of performing their social roles. By 11 o'clock, the master has been working, for maybe an hour if we're generous, and count letter writing and sheep arguments as work, and he's ready for the main event of his day, dinner. The household has been preparing this meal since dawn. He'll simply show up, eat, and compliment or criticize based on his mood. You're still hauling water. The hunting party is returning, triumphant over 3 dead pheasants that the gamekeeper actually shot while the master watched. The day continues its grinding progress forward. At least nobody's asking you to understand sheep breeding. Small mercies. Again. By 11 o'clock, the kitchen has transformed from its morning chaos into something approaching actual warfare. The great dinner, the main meal of the day, served at 1 o'clock is the household's daily performance of wealth, status, and culinary competence, and everything must be perfect, or cook will personally ensure someone suffers for it. You've been reassigned from water hauling to general kitchen assistance, which sounds like a promotion until you realise it means you're now in the direct line of fire when things go wrong. And things are already going wrong. The Swannies, an actual swan, because apparently regular poultry isn't impressive enough, is refusing to roast evenly. It's a massive bird, probably 20 pounds, suspended on the turning spit over the roasting hearth, and despite the spit boy's best efforts at maintaining consistent rotation, one side is browning faster than the other. Cook is screaming about this like it's a personal betrayal. Turn it evenly, you useless child. Do you want the master to think we're serving him shark wool? The spit boy, who's maybe 10 years old and has been manually turning this roasting mechanism for 2 hours straight, looks close to tears that keeps cranking. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Elite dinners in the 17th century typically featured 2 or 3 courses, but these weren't sequential servings like modern meals. Instead, each course meant a complete table setting with multiple dishes presented simultaneously, meats, pies, puddings, salads from which diners could choose. A formal dinner might include 20 or 30 different dishes across all courses, creating a visual spectacle of abundance, even though most of it would barely be touched. This wasn't about eating, it was about displaying wealth through calculated excess. You've been assigned to the subtlety station, and you're already regretting every life choice that brought you here. Subtleties are elaborate, decorative food. Sculptures, architectural constructions of marzipan, sugar paste, and gilded pastry meant to impress guests and demonstrate the household's sophistication. Today's subtlety is supposed to be a castle with tiny banners, and you're tasked with helping the pastry specialist who, remember, considers herself nobility compared to you construct the turrets from marchpane paste. Your fingers are sticky with almond paste and rosewater. The castle is listing slightly to one side like it's already been sieged. The pastry specialist keeps huffing in exasperation and correcting your work, which would be helpful if her corrections were consistent instead of changing every 30 seconds. No, more height on that turret. No, now it's too tall. No, the angle is wrong. Have you never seen a castle? You want to point out that no, actually, you haven't seen a castle because you're a scullery maid whose life experience consists of this manor, the village church, and nothing else, but you value your employment too much, to be honest. Meanwhile, the main cooking hearths are producing their own disasters. A venison pie has developed a crack in its pastry coffin, the thick pastry shell used to contain the filling, and gravy is leaking out onto the hearth, creating smoke and the smell of burning meat juice. Cook dispatches someone to patch it with more pastry, but the damage is done. The presentation will be imperfect, which means someone will definitely hear about this later. The boiling hearth is a landscape of suspended pots, a pottage of vegetables and barley bubbling away, a fricassee of rabbit in white sauce, a pudding boiling in its cough like a medieval chemistry experiment. Each requires constant monitoring because the line between perfectly cooked and ruined is approximately 30 seconds of inattention. A lower kitchen maid is stationed here with a long wooden spoon, stirring, tasting, adding salt, trying desperately not to scald herself on steam or boiling liquid. Historians still argue whether elaborate dinner presentations actually impressed dinner guests or just became expected social theatre that everyone participated in without genuine appreciation. But standing here watching the pastry specialist nearly weep over marchpane turrets, you're pretty sure it's the latter. This is performance art disguised as food. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households employed carvers' servants, specifically trained in the elaborate ritual of carving and serving meat at table, complete with specialized vocabulary and techniques that took years to master. Carving wasn't just cutting meat, it was a skilled performance with terms like dismember that heron or thigh that pigeon. Your household isn't quite wealthy enough for a dedicated carver, so the butler will do it, but in truly elite circles, this was a separate profession with guild training and everything. The cook is now screaming about the sauce. Apparently the butter sauce for the swan has split the butter and liquid have separated instead of emulsifying. And this is catastrophic. How can you, incompetent fools, ruin a butter sauce? It's butter and wine and herbs. A child could make this. She's personally taking over, whisking frantically, adding drops of cold water to try to bring it back together. Her face is purple. Veins are visible on her forehead. This is not a woman who accepts culinary failure gracefully. You're still fighting with the marchpane castle. One turret has collapsed entirely. The pastry specialist has given up on you and is rebuilding it herself, muttering about incompetence and wondering why she's cursed to work with such useless assistants. You consider mentioning that maybe if she'd actually trained you instead of just criticizing, the turret wouldn't have fallen, but again, employment. The chicken's plural, there are 4 of them are also roasting, along with a joint of beef, a leg of mutton, and some game birds whose species you can't even identify. The roasting hearth is a wall of heat and smoke, and the spit boy is drenched in sweat, his face smudged with soot, his arms trembling from the constant cranking. Someone should relieve him. And in Prest, there's, to be quite, no one does. He's the spit boy. His job is suffering. Side dishes are multiplying across every available surface. Salads of winter greens with oil and vinegar, a tart of dried fruits, a dish of buttered parsnips, something involving oysters that looks vaguely terrifying, and the omnipresent manchet bread that distinguishes gentlefolk from everyone else. The sheer volume of food being produced for maybe 8 people is staggering. Most of it will be partially eaten, then relegated to servants' meals or sold to the poor. 12:30. 30 minutes until service. The kitchen has reached fever pitch. Cook is everywhere at once, tasting, adjusting, shouting. The butler appears to begin collecting dishes for presentation. The marchpane castle, miraculously, has survived and looks almost intentional. The swan is browning beautifully. The sauce has come back together through sheer force of culinary will. You're dismissed back to the scullery because the real professionals need to handle service. You'll see the results later when mountains of barely touched food return on platters for washing. For now, you've survived dinner preparation without major injury or dismissal. In the 17th century, that counts as victory. 1 o'clock arrives with the inexorable certainty of death and taxes, and the dining room transforms into a stage where every movement is choreographed, every gesture loaded with social meaning, and every servant becomes an actor in a performance they've rehearsed 1,000 times but still somehow mess up. You're not serving today, that honour goes to the footman and the butler, but you're watching from the servants' passage because, honestly, dinner service is the most entertainment you'll get all week, and also because you're waiting to receive the dirty dishes that will soon flow toward the scullery like a tidal wave of gravy-stained destruction. The family is already seated in strict hierarchical order. The master sits at the head of the table in a chair that's noticeably larger and more ornate than everyone else's. We're talking carved wood, cushioned seat, arms, the works. The lady sits to his right, the position of honour for the ranking female. The eldest son sits to the master's left because he's the heir and must be constantly reminded of his future importance. The younger children are arranged by age and gender according to some complex calculus of favouritism and social training. The widowed aunt sits near the foot of the table, close enough to be included, but far enough to remember she's dependent charity. This seating arrangement isn't arbitrary. It's a visual diagram of power, inheritance and family hierarchy that everyone can read at a glance. Historians still argue whether 17th century seating protocols were rigidly enforced or somewhat flexible, depending on household culture. But watching this family settle into their assigned positions like chess pieces, you're pretty sure flexibility is not a concept anyone's embraced. The table itself is a marvel of textile warfare, a linen tablecloth so white it practically glows, embroidered at the edges with the family's initials, because even table linens must broadcast ownership. Each place setting includes a trenchera thick slice of stale bread that serves as an edible platy linen napkin, a knife because forks are still somewhat newfangled and not universally adopted, a spoon for pottage, and a shared cup for wine because individual drinking vessels are still a luxury the middling gentry are gradually adopting but haven't fully committed to. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The fork was introduced to England from Italy in the early 17th century, but was considered effeminate and suspiciously foreign by many. Most people ate with knives, spoons, and their fingers well into the 1700s. The family uses forks today because they're fashionable, but you can tell the master is uncomfortable with Hishi keeps using it incorrectly and then switching back to his knife to spear meat like God intended. The butler begins bringing in the first course, and it's a spectacle. Remember that swan? It arrives on a massive silver platter, gilded with gold leaf. Yes, actual edible gold, because regular cooked bird isn't expensive enough, arranged with its feathers artfully replaced to make it look almost alive. The butler presents it to the master with a flourish that would make a theatre actor jealous. The master nods approvingly. The swan is placed in the centre of the table, surrounded by supporting dishes, the venison pie crack successfully concealed, roasted chickens, the beef joint, salads, tarts, the marchpane castle looking slyly drunk but present. The sheer volume of food for 8 people is obscene. There are at least 15 dishes on the table, and this is just the first course. Most of it won't be eaten. Most of it is designed not to be eaten eats, meant to be looked at, admired, used as evidence of the household's prosperity. Carving begins. The butler, who's been practicing his carving techniques since approximately the dawn of time, approaches the swan with specialized carving knives and begins the elaborate process of dismembering it. Yes, that's the actual technical term, delightfully violent. He carves with precision, creating uniform slices that he arranges on a serving platter. Each family member will receive a portion according to their rank. The master gets the best cuts, the lady gets the next best, and so on down the line until the youngest daughter gets whatever's left over and doesn't complain because she's being trained in feminine submission. Here's your quirky tidbit. In very formal households, the carver would announce each cut with its proper name. I break that deer, I lift that swan, I spoil that hen, using a vocabulary that sounds like he's committing crimes against poultry. Your butler is too practical for this nonsense, but somewhere in England, people are definitely still saying, I dismember that peacock, with straight faces. The family eats slowly, conversation drifting between estate business, neighbourhood gossip, and mild complaints about the food temperature. The master mentions the morning hunt. The lady discusses the linen inventory. The eldest son attempts to say something intelligent about the swan and is gently corrected by his father. The younger children are mostly silent, learning through observation how to perform gentility. You notice what they're eating versus what they're ignoring. The swan gets polite attention but isn't actually very popular. It's tough, gamey, and honestly kind of mediocre despite the gold leaf. The venison pie is a hit. The chickens are being enthusiastically consumed. The salads remain largely untouched because vegetables are peasant food and no one wants to appear too interested in them. The trencher's toast bread plates are slowly soaking up grease, gravy and meat juices. By the end of the meal, they'll be saturated with flavour, transformed from stale bread into something actually delicious. And here's the thing, those trenchers become servants' food. What the family eats off of, you eat later. You'll collect those gravy-soaked bread plates after service, and that'll be your supper bread that's absorbed roasted swan fat, beef drippings, and venison pie gravy. It's the best food you'll eat all week, and it's literally the family's discarded plates. The economic logic is brilliant in its efficiency. The bread serves as plate, soaks up waste, and then feeds servants, eliminating both dishwashing and the need to provide separate servant meals. The social logic is perfectly clear. You eat what they leave behind, you consume their literal leavings, your sustenance depends on their excess. It's hierarchy made edible. Second course arrives. More dishes, different meats, a custard, some kind of elaborate jelly that wobbles ominously. The marchpane castle makes its grand entrance and receives polite applause from the children. The pastry specialist watching from the kitchen probably feels vindicated. You feel tired. By 2 o'clock the family is slowing down, leaning back in their chairs, dabbing at their mouths with those embroidered napkins. They've eaten maybe a quarter of what was served. The rest will flow backward through the household hierarchy. Upper servants get first pick of leftovers, then skilled workers, then you scraping trenchers and hoping for a decent portion. The butler begins clearing. Dishes move towards you. Mountains of half-eaten food, saucer-smeared platters, and yes, those beautiful gravy-soaked trenchers. Your supper is secured. Your dishwashing nightmare is just beginning. Theatre concludes. Reality resumes. While you're standing elbow-deep in cold, greasy dishwater scrubbing the swan platter, which still has gold leaf stuck to it, by the way, because apparently even washing dishes must be complicated, the family is retiring to the parlour for what they call digestion, and what you'd call doing absolutely nothing while pretending it's an activity. They've just consumed enough food to feed a small village, and now they need several hours of gentle entertainment to help their stomachs process this festival of excess. The parlour is warm. There's actually a fire going because the family's comfort matter sand, furnished with cushioned chairs, embroidered cushions, and all the soft surfaces that make lounging a respectable pastime. The master settles into his favourite chair with a groan that suggests the swan is fighting back from inside. The lady arranges herself on a settle with her needlework basket, though you suspect she'll accomplish about 3 stitches before abandoning it for compensation. The children are dispersed to various corners with books or quiet games, under strict instructions to be seen and not heard, while the adults engage in the serious business of gossip. The widowed auntlets call her Aunt Prudence because every manor has an Aunt Prudence living there on sufferance, immediately launches into neighbourhood news. I heard from Mary's cousin, who knows the housekeeper at Thornfield Manor, that Sir Robert's eldest daughter has been seen walking with the vicar's son, unchaperoned. Twice. She delivers this with the scandalized tone of someone announcing a murder. The lady perks up immediately. This is premium gossip. The vicar's son, but he has no prospects whatsoever. Sir Robert must be beside himself. Apparently, Aunt Prudence continues, warming to her subject, the girl claims they're discussing theology. It's theology. The way she says it makes clear that theology is obviously code for something far more scandalous. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Social visiting and gossip networks were crucial information systems in the 17th century, especially for women who had limited access to formal news sources. Household visits, letter-writing circles, and post-dinner conversation sessions like this one were how people learned about marriages, deaths, business failures, political developments, and social scandals. Gossip wasn't trivial, it was intelligence gathering. The master, less interested in the romantic misadventures of neighbours' daughters, rings a small bell, and the butler appears instantly. He was definitely lurking just outside the door waiting for this. "Cards," the master announces. "And bring the good wine." Not the household stuff, the French claret. The butler bows and disappears. You know what this means. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone's being dispatched to the locked wine cellar to retrieve a bottle that costs more than your annual wages while you're scrubbing dishes with soap made from ashes and animal fat. The contrasts just keep coming. The card table is set up a specialized piece of furniture that folds out specifically for gaming because regular tables are apparently insufficient for card-playing purposes. The master, the lady, and Aunt Prudence settle in for a game of Primero, which is basically an early version of poker involving betting, bluffing, and the kind of competitive tension that makes family gatherings awkward. Historians still argue whether card-playing in country manners was primarily social entertainment or serious gambling that could lead to financial problems, but watching them now as they begin wagering actual coins, you're pretty sure it's both. The stakes start smaller, few pennies per hand, but you can see the master getting that competitive gleam in his eye that suggests this will escalate. The eldest son is allowed to observe, supposedly learning the masculine art of strategic gaming, but really he's learning that father cheats when he thinks no one's watching, and mother has a better poker face than anyone gives her credit for. The younger children have been sent to the nursery with their governess because card playing is adult business, and also because the vocabulary tends to deteriorate as the stakes increase. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some particularly religious households banned card playing entirely, viewing it as the devil's pastime, but many others compartmentalize by forbidding cards on Sundays while enthusiastically gambling the other 6 days of the week. Your household falls into the latter category. The master wouldn't dream of missing Sunday services, but he'll happily wager 5 shillings on a card game Monday through Saturday without seeing any contradiction. Meanwhile, back in your world of dishwashing and drudgery, the aftermath of dinner continues to unfold. You've now washed approximately 40 dishes, and you may be halfway done. Your hands are red and chapped from the harsh soap. The water has gone cold. Watcha! You're contemplating whether it's worth heating more water or just suffering through the cold when the pastry specialist appears with yet another tray of serving pieces. "The family wants sweet biscuits with their cards," she announces with the air of someone delivering a royal decree. "Which means I need the good baking sheets, which means you need to wash them immediately." You stare at her, at the mountain of unwashed dishes, at your hands that are already staging a revolt against your employment. "I'll get to them as soon as now," she interrupts. The family is waiting. The family is currently arguing about whether Aunt Prudence's last play constituted cheating. It did, obviously, but no one will say so directly. They're not actually waiting for anything except the wine to arrive. But hierarchy means the pastry specialist can demand immediate service, and you have to comply or face consequences. You abandon the swan platter mid-scrub and start on the baking sheets. Welcome to servant life. Your priorities are always being rearranged by people who outrank you. In the parlour, the theological portion of the afternoon has begun. The master, emboldened by 2 glasses of expensive claret, has decided to pontificate about predestination. Calvin was quite clear on the matter, he declares, as if he's actually read Calvin instead of hearing about him in the chaplain's sermons. Our fates are predetermined by divine will. The lady, who's just won 3 hands in a row and is feeling intellectually confident, pushes back. But surely free will plays some role, otherwise what's the point of moral behaviour? This is dangerous. Territory religious debate among the gentry can get heated fast, especially when alcohol is involved. Aunt Prudence attempts to mediate by changing the subject to something less controversial, like whether the new lace from Brussels is worth the expense. It's not, but people buy it anyway because fashion. The afternoon stretches on. More cards, more wine, more gossip about neighbours. Someone mentions politics, briefly something about Parliament and taxes, but it's dismissed as too heavy for post-dinner conversation. The children are summoned for a brief appearance, perform adequately, and are dismissed back to their lessons. You're still washing dishes. The scullery has become your entire universe. Grease, soap, water, repeat. Your back aches from bending over the washing tubs. Your feet hurt from standing on cold stone. The trenches you were excited about earlier are now just more items in the endless queue of things requiring cleaning. Outside, the November afternoon is getting darker earlier. By 4 o'clock the light will be failing. Someone will need to start bringing candles around to the main roofs. The evening routine will begin, another cycle in the endless wheel of household labour. But for now, the family lounges in warm, wine-soaked comfort, gambling small amounts they can afford to lose while debating theology they barely understand. And you wash dishes in cold water, counting the hours until you can collapse into bed. Same manner, different universes, forever. By 3 o'clock the master has apparently remembered that he actually owns an estate and should probably check that it hasn't burned down or been stolen while he was gambling with his wife. The card game breaks up with Aunt Prudence down 2 shillings, which she'll complain about for weeks, and the master pleasantly buzzed on French claret. He announces his intention to walk the grounds, which is gentry speak for inspect my property while feeling very important about land ownership. You won't be joining him, obviously, you're still in the scullery, but the steward will, along with one of the outdoor workers to carry things and look useful. You know about this walk because you'll eventually see them pass through the courtyard on their way to the fields, and also because the entire household knows the master's schedule better than he does. It's part of how you survive, knowing where the powerful people are so you can avoid accidentally getting in their way. The master changes into more practical outdoor wear, still expensive wool, still impeccably tailored, but slightly less precious than his morning hunting outfit. Wellington boots haven't been invented yet, so he's wearing tall leather boots that some servant spent an hour polishing this morning. He grabs a walking stick not because he needs it for walking, but because country gentlemen carry walking sticks the way modern businessmen carry briefcases. It's part of the costume. Mr. Bartholomew the steward joins him at the courtyard, clutching his ever-present ledger and looking like a man who'd rather be literally anywhere else. The steward has already walked this estate twice today on at dawn doing actual inspections, and once after breakfast checking on specific problems. This third tour is purely for the master's benefit, a guided performance of looking at things while the steward explains what's wrong with them. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Estate management in the 17th century required constant vigilance over agricultural operations, tenant compliance, property maintenance, and resource allocation. Landowners who neglected this oversight risked declining rents, deteriorating infrastructure, and tenant rebellions. The walking inspection tour was how responsible landowners or their stewards caught problems before they became disaster: a rotting barn beam, a tenant falling behind on rent, field drainage issues, poaching activity, boundary disputes. They head first to the home farm, the portion of the estate the master farms directly rather than renting to tenants. It's about 200 acres of mixed use, grain fields, pasture for livestock, hay meadows, woodland. The November landscape is brown and dormant, fields lying fallow after harvest, stubble poking through mud. A few sheep are grazing in the distance, looking profoundly unbothered by the approach of their theoretical owner. The master surveys his domain with the satisfied expression of someone who's never personally ploughed a furrow, but takes full credit for the wheat that grows. Good, he pronounces, using a word he probably learned from an agricultural improvement pamphlet. The steward nods diplomatically, not mentioning that this particular field's drainage is terrible and yields have been declining for 3 years. They inspect the barn's next massive timber structures housing hay, grain, and agricultural equipment. One barn has a suspicious sag in the roof beam. The steward points this out. The master frowns, calculating costs. Can it wait until spring? It could, the steward says carefully, but if we get heavy snow, the whole roof might collapse, destroying everything stored inside and possibly killing livestock. Fix it then, the master decides, as if this wisdom required deep contemplation. The steward makes a note. He already knew this needed fixing, probably already hired the carpenter, but the master must feel he's made the decision. Historians still argue whether 17th century landowners were genuinely involved in estate management or merely performed supervisory roles while stewards did all actual work, but watching this interaction, you're pretty confident it's the latter. The master knows just enough to ask semi-intelligent questions. The steward knows everything and carefully manages the master's ego while getting necessary work approved. They move toward the tenant cottages, and here's where the afternoon gets uncomfortable. Tenant housing in a 17th century manor ranges from barely adequate to actively dangerous, and you're about to witness both extremes. The first cottage they approach belongs to William, a tenant farmer with 40 acres and a moderately prosperous holding. His cottage is stone, 2 rooms, thatched roof in decent repair, a vegetable garden, a pigsty. Not luxurious, but survivable. William emerges, cap in hand, bowing. "Master, good day to you, sir." The master nods regally. "William, how are the crops?" "Fair, sir. The barley did well. Lost some wheat to rust, but overall can't complain." This is the dance. The master asks questions that demonstrate concern. The tenant provides optimistic answers that don't reveal problems. Everyone pretends this relationship is based on mutual respect rather than economic coercion. William's rent is due at Christmas. He'll pay it, barely, because the alternative is eviction and homelessness. The master will accept it graciously, as if he's doing William a favour by allowing him to continue existing on land his family has worked for 4 generations. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some progressive landowners in this era experimented with model cottages improved housing for tenants, with features like glazed windows, better drainage, and separate rooms for animals and humans. This was partly humanitarian and partly practical. Healthier tenants worked harder and paid rent more reliably. Your master is not a progressive landowner. His tenants' cottages have evolved organically over centuries with minimal investment beyond emergency repairs. They continue to the next cottage, and this one is grim. This is where John lives. Remember him from the steward's morning, the guy who's behind on rent because his cow died? His cottage is wattle and daub construction. 1 room, dirt floor, thatch so old and deteriorated that daylight shows through gaps. 6 children plus a pregnant wife live here in space smaller than the master's dressing room. The smell hits you from 10 feet away. Unwashed bodies, cooked smoke, animal waste from the chickens that apparently live inside. John appears, looking even more desperate than he did this morning. The master surveys the cottage with visible distaste. "The thatch needs work," he observes. "Yes, sir," John agrees miserably. "I've been meaning to, but with the harvest and then—" "See to it," the master interrupts. "Can't have my tenants living in squalor." Reflects poorly on the estate. He walks away. The steward lingers briefly. "Get the thatch fixed before winter, John. I'll advance you materials from the estate supply. Add it to what you owe." John nods, doing the mental math. He's now even deeper in debt for repairs that benefit the landowner's property, which he'll pay for through labour or increased rent. But what choice does he have? The inspection continues. Fields, fences, a mill pond that needs dredging, a boundary stone that's been moved, possibly by the neighbour encroaching on the estate. This will require investigation and probably a lawsuit. The master asks questions, the steward provides answers, and the outdoor worker following them carries the walking stick when the master gets tired of holding it. By 4:30, they're heading back to the manor, the master satisfied he's done his duty as a responsible landowner. He's walked maybe 2 miles, looked at things, made one actual decision, the barn repair, and reinforced to his tenants that he exists and owns them. The steward will work until dark addressing the dozens of actual problems the master barely noticed. You're still washing dishes, but at least now there are only 20 left. The sun is setting. The day grinds forward. You finally finish the dinner dishes by 4 o'clock, and your hands look like raw meat that's been left in the sun too long. But there's no rest, because the afternoon shift of drudgery is just beginning, and you've been reassigned to help with the laundry. Yes, the laundry. The multi-day ordeal that makes dishwashing look like a pleasant recreational activity. The laundry building is a separate structure behind the main house, strategically located downwind so the smell of boiling lye and wet wool doesn't offend the gentry's delicate sensibilities. Inside, it's a scene from some particularly vindictive circle of hell, enormous wooden tubs of soaking linens, copper cauldrons boiling over open fires, and 3 laundresses who look like they've aged 40 years in the past week alone. The head laundress, Big Margaret, because of course she's called Big Margaret, spots you and points at a soaking tub with a wooden bat. You. Beating. Start with the table linens. Don't stop until your arms fall off, and even then, keep going. The wooden bat is essentially a cricket bat designed for assaulting textiles. Your job is to lift each soaking linen from the tub. They're heavy, waterlogged, and smell like a chemical weapon. Lay them across a wooden beating block and then pound them with the bat to literally beat the dirt out. It's exactly as violent and exhausting as it sounds. You lift a tablecloth, the same white linen from today's dinner, now stained with wine, gravy, and what appears to be swan grease, and start beating. Thwack, 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 thwack. Your shoulders, already destroyed from this morning's water hauling, stage an immediate protest. Your back joins the complaint. Your wrists are filing formal grievances. But you keep beating because the alternative is Big Margaret's wrath, and Big Margaret once chased someone through 3 fields for improper wringing technique. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Laundry in the 17th century was typically done once a month, or even quarterly for wealthy households, because the process was so labour-intensive and damaging to fabrics. Linens were soaked for days in wood ash lye, which was caustic and destroyed fibres over time, beaten to remove stains, boiled in massive cauldrons, rinsed in streams or rivers, wrung out by twisting between 2 people, and then laid on bushes or grass to dry and bleach in the sun. The entire process could take a week from start to finish, required enormous quantities of water and firewood, and shortened the lifespan of textiles considerably. Next to you, another servant is working the boiling cauldron, using a long wooden pole to stir linens in water so hot that steam is rising in clouds. Her face is bright red from heat exposure. Sweat is dripping off her nose. She's been doing this for 2 hours, and will continue for at least another 2 because the boiling stage is cruciality, kills vermin. Oh yes, there are definitely lice and fleas in these fancy linens, removes stubborn stains through sheer thermal violence, and whitens the fabric. Historians still argue whether the caustic nature of historical laundry methods was understood by practitioners or simply accepted as necessary wear and tear, but standing here beating a tablecloth that's already starting to show thin spots from repeated abuse, you're pretty sure nobody cares about preserving fabric when the priority is not dying from plague carried by dirty linens. Across the room, 2 women are engaged in the wringing process, which looks like a medieval torture technique. They've taken a boiled sheet, twisted it from opposite ends, and are literally wringing it like they're trying to strangle it. Water gushes out, their arms shake with effort. One woman's face is contorted in a grimace that suggests she's reconsidering every life choice that led to this moment. They twist harder, more water. Eventually, the sheet will go from soaking wet to merely damp, at which point it can be taken outside to dry. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households use wringing machines, basically 2 wooden rollers turned by a crank that squeezed water from fabric more efficiently than human twisting. These were rare and expensive, status symbols that said, "We're so wealthy we've mechanized our laundry oppression." Your household does not have a wringing machine. Your household has you and your fellow servants' arm strength, which is free. You're on your 3rd tablecloth when you notice the mice. They're scurrying along the rafters, completely unbothered by human activity, probably heading toward the grain storage where they'll feast on the winter wheat supply. Mice are everywhere in manor houses' walls, floors, ceilings, storage areas, and the battle against them is constant and mostly futile. You've tried traps, poison when you can get it, the barn cats who are lazy and prefer sleeping to hunting, and desperate prayers. Nothing works. The mice are winning. They've always been winning. Big Margaret sees you watching the mice and snorts. Back to work. They're not going anywhere, and neither are you until these linens are done. You return to beating. Thwack, 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 thwack. The rhythm becomes meditative in the way that repetitive torture sometimes does. Your mind wanders. You think about nothing and everything, the pain in your shoulders, whether you'll get bread for supper, the injustice of a social system where some people have embroidered chamber pots while you're beating their tablecloths with a stick. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the household, the afternoon drudgery parade continues. In the brew house, yet another outbuilding, because wealthy households have separate buildings for everything. The brewing is happening. Beer isn't a luxury in the 17th century, it's a necessity, the primary safe beverage for daily consumption, because water from wells is a game of Russian roulette with dysentery. Every household brews regularly, and it's a skilled, multi-day process overseen by someone who actually knows what they're doing. The brewer, a woman who's been making beer for 20 years and has opinions about malt, the way sommeliers have opinions about wineries currently managing the mashing stage. She's mixed malted barley with hot water in a large tun, creating a sweet liquid wort that will eventually become beer. The temperature has to be precisely controlled. Too hot and you kill the enzymes, too cold and the extraction doesn't work. She's testing it constantly, tasting, checking colour, adjusting. Tomorrow this wort will be boiled with hops which add bitterness and act as preservative, then cooled, then transferred to fermentation vessels with yeast, then left to ferment for several days. The whole process requires constant monitoring, perfect sanitation, or as close as you can get in the 17th century, and genuine skill. It's one of the few servant positions that's actually respected, because brewing bad beer can make everyone sick. Or, worse, leave the household without safe drinking water. You're still beating linens. Your arms have moved beyond pain into a kind of numb mechanical operation. Big Margaret inspects your work, grunts approval, the highest praise you'll get, and points you toward the ringing station. Help them. They're falling behind. You join the ringing team, grabbing one end of a soaking sheet while your partner grabs the other. You twist. She twists. Your shoulders scream. Water gushes. You twist harder, feeling tendons in your forearms protest this abuse. More water. The sheet gradually transforms from heavy enough to drown in to merely soaking. Eventually, you succeed. The sheet goes into the ready-for-drying basket. Next sheet. Twist. Water. Pain. Repeat. The mice are still scampering in the rafters. The fire under the boiling cauldron is still roaring. Big Margaret is still shouting orders. The November afternoon is getting darker, colder. You've been working for 12 hours. You have at least 4 more to go. The laundry continues. Bow! The vermin continue. Your back continues to hurt. Welcome to the never-ending battle of household maintenance, where nothing ever stays clean and everything requires violence. At least you're not the one stirring the boiling cauldron. Small mercies, still counting them. While you're wringing laundry until your joints scream, the children upstairs are engaged in their own form of torture, education. You could actually hear it drifting down from the schoolroom, the drone of Latin conjugations, the plunk of harpsichord keys being murdered by small fingers, and the occasional sharp voice of Mr. R. Wickham the tutor, delivering corrections that sound suspiciously like threats. The Gentry Children's Afternoon is dedicated to learning all the skills they'll need to eventually oppress future generations with maximum efficiency. The schoolroom is on the 2nd floor, away from the noise and smell of the working household, because heaven forbid the children's education be contaminated by the reality of where their comfort comes from. It's a dedicated space with actual desks, books, writing materials, and this is the part that would make your childhood self weep heat. There's a fire going. The children are warm while learning. You learn to read barely in the village church with 40 other children. No heat, one shared hornbook, and a schoolmaster who believes strongly in the educational value of hitting people with sticks. The eldest son, 14-year-old Thomas, the heir, the future masteress, currently conjugating Latin verbs under Mr. Wickham's supervision. Amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant, he recites in the bored monotone of someone who's done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more, because Latin is the mark of a gentleman, even if he'll never actually use it for anything except proving he learned it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Elite boys in the 17th century received extensive classical education, Latin, Greek, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, history from private tutors or at grammar schools and universities. This education served multiple purposes. It provided intellectual training, demonstrated family wealth. Education was expensive, created social networks among the gentry class, and established cultural markers that distinguished gentlemen from commoners. A man who could quote Cicero in Latin was definitively not a farmer, even if he owned farms. Mr. Wickham is a younger son from a respectable but impoverished gentry family, educated at Cambridge, now employed teaching other people's children because his own family couldn't provide him an inheritance or a church living. He's probably 25, deeply frustrated with his station in life, and takes out this frustration through pedantic insistence on perfect Latin pronunciation. "Again," he says when Thomas stumbles on the subjunctive. "A gentleman must command language, not murder it." Thomas sighs and starts over. You can practically hear his soul dying from boredom. Next to Latin comes mathematics specifically, the kind of practical arithmetic a future landowner needs, calculating rents, measuring fields, determining grain yields, managing accounts. This is actually useful education, unlike the Latin, and Thomas perks up slightly when working through a problem about how many bushels of wheat a 40-acre field should produce. He gets the answer wrong. Mr. Wickham corrects him with barely concealed exasperation. Historians still argue whether 17th century gentry education was primarily about practical skills or social performance, but watching this lesson unfold well, hearing it through the floorboards while you wring laundry, you're pretty sure it's both. Thomas needs to know enough mathematics to not be completely robbed by his future steward, but he also needs to demonstrate he's had enough education to quote dead Romans at dinner parties. The younger son 11-year-old Robert, the spare Aries in the same room receiving a lighter version of the same curriculum. He's less crucial to the family's future, so his education is less intense, but he still gets Latin, arithmetic, and basic classical training, because he might need to become a clergyman or lawyer if Thomas produces enough heirs to cut him out of inheritance. Education is insurance against downward mobility. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy families sent younger sons on educational tours of Europe after university grand tour, where they'd visit classical sites, learn French and Italian, acquire culture, and mostly drink wine and sleep with prostitutes while pretending to study architecture. Your family isn't quite wealthy enough for this, so Robert's European education will consist of books and maps and Mr. Wickham's dubious pronunciation of French phrases. Now we shift rooms because girls get different education entirely. The daughters 12-year-old Elizabeth and 8-year-old Annie are in the adjacent chamber with their governess, Miss Sarah, learning the skills appropriate to their future roles as gentlemen's wives. No Latin for them, no university prospects. Instead, they're learning needlework, basic arithmetic enough to manage household accounts, reading and writing in English only, music, dancing, and the subtle art of being decorative while appearing useful. Elizabeth is currently massacring a piece on the virginals, a small harpsichord, her fingers stumbling through a simple dance tune while Miss Sarah winces and makes encouraging noises that everyone knows are lies. Very good, dear. Now, with more feeling. The feeling Elizabeth is currently expressing is, I hate this instrument and wish it would burst into flames, but Miss Sarah pretends not to notice. Anne is embroidering attempting to embroider a sampler with her name and the date, a project she's been working on for 6 months and which currently looks like it was stitched by a drunk spider. Her stitches are uneven, the thread is tangled, and she's already pricked her finger twice today, leaving small bloodstains on the linen that will need to be soaked out. But she perseveres because needlework is essential for gentle ladies, proof of patience, delicacy, and the ability to spend hours doing decorative labour that serves no practical purpose beyond demonstrating you have time to waste. Miss Sarah is herself a product of this educational systema gentlewoman from a family that lost its money, now employed teaching other girls to be marriageable. She's probably 30, unmarried obviously, or she wouldn't be working and caught in the same trap as Mr. Same Trap. Wickham, educated enough to teach the gentry, but not wealthy enough to be one of them. She receives room, board, and a small salary in exchange for transforming these girls into acceptable wives. The education includes comportment lessons that sound exhausting just to hear about. A lady never laughs loudly, Miss Sarah instructs, as Elizabeth giggles at something. A gentle smile, perhaps a soft chuckle, but never a guffaw. That's for servants and farm wives. Thanks, Miss Sarah. Appreciate the reminder that your joy is supposed to be rationed by social class. They practice walking with books balanced on their heads to improve posture. They learn how to enter a room, how to curtsy to various ranks, different depths for different levels of nobility. It's a whole science. how to make polite conversation without saying anything interesting, and how to decline marriage proposals from unsuitable men without causing social offence. This is education as performance art, training girls to be living decorations in their future husbands' homes. Dancing lessons happen twice weekly with a visiting dancing master. Not today, thankfully, because you can hear those through the entire house, and the dancing master has opinions about feet placement that he shares at volume. The girls are learning the minuet, the gavotte, and other formal dances that will allow them to perform grace at social gatherings. Dancing isn't exercise, it's social currency. The boys will also get dancing, lessons, different ones, because leading is different from following along, with fencing instruction for duels and honour, riding because gentlemen must sit a horse properly, and eventually instruction in managing servants, dealing with tenants, and all the skills needed to run an estate like this one. You know all this because servants observe everything. You've watched Mr. Wickham arrive and depart. You've heard the music lessons through walls, you've cleaned the schoolroom and seen the educational materials, and you've observed that every aspect of gentry children's education reinforces the idea that they're fundamentally different from people like you, more refined, more cultured, more deserving of comfort and power. Your own education? You can read basic English, write your name, and do arithmetic well enough to know when someone's cheating you. You learned this in stolen moments from a charitable schoolmaster who pitied poor children without books or heat or any of the resources lavished on Thomas and Elizabeth upstairs. The lesson continues above you. Latin verbs, harpsichord scales, embroidery stitches. You ring another sheet. Water gushes. Same house, different futures. By 5 o'clock, just as you're finishing your laundry ordeal and contemplating whether your arms will ever function normally again, there's a commotion at the front entrance that sends ripples of panic through the household. Visitors, unannounced visitors. Lady Thornfield and her daughter have arrived in their carriage for a brief afternoon call, which means the household must instantly transform from its current state of organised chaos into a performance of effortless gentility. The housekeeper appears in the laundry building, moving faster than you've ever seen her move. You, clean apron, now. The parlour needs refreshments immediately. You look down at your current apron, which is soaked with dirty laundry water, covered in soap residue, and has somehow acquired what looks like a mouse dropping. You grab your spare apron, slightly less disgusting, and run toward the kitchen while Big Margaret shouts after you about abandoned linens. The kitchen erupts into controlled panic. Cook is pulling out preserved fruits, calling for the good serving plates, and demanding to know why nobody warned her there would be visitors, because they weren't warned, because visitors just appear in the 17th century like particularly well-dressed plagues. You're dispatched to arrange refreshments on a tray, small cakes that were baked this morning for tomorrow, candied fruits from the still room, Hippocras spiced wine in the fancy glass decanter, and those delicate little biscuits the pastry specialist made yesterday and has been jealously guarding. Meanwhile, upstairs in the parlour, the lady has been alerted and is smoothly transitioning from her afternoon needlework into social performance mode. She's already sitting in her favourite chair, her embroidery prominently displayed. She may have completed approximately 3 stitches this afternoon, but that's not the point. The point is the appearance of industrious femininity. Aunt Prudence has materialised from wherever she was lurking, also armed with needlework. The daughters have been summoned from their lessons, hastily checked for presentability, and positioned in the room like attractive furniture. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Afternoon social visiting was a crucial component of gentry women's social networks in the 17th century. These calls served multiple functions, maintaining family alliances, gathering and distributing gossip, arranging potential marriages, displaying wealth and refinement, and simply combating the isolation of country life. The timing was usually afternoon between dinner and supper, the duration was supposed to be brief, an hour at most, and the ritual was governed by complex unwritten rules about who could visit whom, how often, and under what circumstances. Lady Thornfield sweeps in wearing what's clearly her visiting outfit, a gown that says, "I'm making an effort but not trying too hard," and jewellery that says, "My husband's estate is prospering. Thank you for noticing." Her daughter Margaret trails behind, looking uncomfortable in stays that are probably too tight and a smile that's definitely too forced. This is a reconnaissance mission disguised as a social call, lady. Thornfield is here to assess whether Thomas the heir would be a suitable match for Margaret, and everyone in the room knows it except possibly Thomas, who's been mercifully spared this particular performance. You enter with the refreshment tray, trying desperately not to trip, spill, or otherwise humiliate yourself in front of company. You set the tray on the side table, curtsy probably incorrectly, and escape as fast as social protocol allows. But you don't go far. You're stationed just outside the door in case more refreshments are needed, which means you can hear everything. "What lovely work," Lady Thornfield coos, examining your lady's embroidery. They both know it's mediocre at best, but the compliment isn't about the embroidery. It's an opening gambit in the afternoon's social chess match. "You're too kind," your lady responds. "I'm afraid I've been distracted by household matters." The demands never cease. Translation: I'm a competent household manager, unlike some people whose estates are rumoured to be poorly run. Indeed, Lady Thornfield agrees. I was just saying to Sir Thomas, managing a household requires such constant attention. She emphasises constant in a way that suggests she's heard rumours about your lady sometimes delegating to the housekeeper. Historians still argue whether these needlework circles were genuine craft communities or performative social theatre, but listening to this conversation, you're pretty confident it's the latter. Neither woman has made a single stitch since the visit began. The needlework is a prop, a socially acceptable excuse for women to gather and talk without appearing idle. The conversation shifts through predictable topics: weather terrible, roads worse, the new vicar questionable theology, and here we go, children. Your Elizabeth must be, what, 12 now? Lady Thornfield asks with studied casualness. Just past 12, your lady confirms, equally casual, both of them performing a dialogue they've rehearsed in different forms dozens of times. Such a charming age. My Margaret is 15, of course, quite ready for more serious considerations. There it is. The purpose of the visit, wrapped in genteel language. Margaret is marriageable. Thomas is eligible. Perhaps we should discuss alliances? Your lady deflects beautifully. Still so young, both of them. Time enough for such matters. Translation: your daughter is acceptable, but we might find better prospects, so let's not rush into anything. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some particularly ambitious mothers kept detailed notebooks tracking eligible young people in their social circleages, inheritances, family connections, rumours of scandal, essentially creating matchmaking databases, centuries before dating apps. Whether Lady Thornfield has such a notebook you'll never know, but she definitely has the information memorised. The daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, have been sent to the far corner of the room where they're supposedly entertaining each other, but are actually dying of boredom and social anxiety. Elizabeth is showing Margaret her sampler. Margaret is pretending to be impressed. Both girls know they're being evaluated as potential sisters-in-law, and both would probably rather be literally anywhere else. Meanwhile, your lady has moved to safer conversational territory, recipe exchange. I've developed a new receipt for rosewater that I must share with you, she offers, and they're off into the safe world of stillroom secrets, preserving techniques, and the eternal struggle against mouldy preserves. This is genuine information exchange, women trading practical knowledge about household management, medicine, and food preparation that actually matters to their daily lives. The refreshments are being delicately consumed. Fingers are dabbed with napkins. Crumbs are carefully managed. Nobody eats with genuine appetite, because that would be unrefined. You know those cakes will come back half-eaten, wasted, because social performance is more important than actually enjoying food. By 5:30, Lady Thornfield is making departure noises. We mustn't overstay, she says, which is code for I've gathered enough intelligence for today. There are elaborate farewells, promises to visit again soon, compliments exchanged like currency. The daughter curtsies. Your lady's daughters curtsy back. Everyone performs their assigned roles flawlessly. You help them into their carriage, watching as they roll away down the drive. The household exhales collectively. Your lady returns to the parlour and immediately abandons her needlework. The performance is over. You collect the refreshment tray. Half-eaten cakes, barely touched wine, wasted food that could have fed you for days. Back to the scullery, back to washing. The social theatre continues, and you're just the stage crew. The visitor debacle is barely concluded when you're hit with the next crisis: supper preparations. Yes, the family already consumed enough food at dinner to sustain a small village, but apparently 3 hours later they need to eat again. Supper is supposedly a light meal, emphasis on supposedly, which in gentry terms means only 10 dishes instead of 20, and cold preparations instead of elaborate roasting. In servant terms, it means you're coordinating another full meal production when you've already been working for 14 hours and your body is staging a comprehensive revolt. The kitchen has shifted into its evening configuration. The massive roasting fires have been allowed to die down to embers finally, some relief from the infernal heat, but the preparation tables are covered with the components of tonight's supper: cold meats from dinner that need artistic arrangement, cheeses that need slicing, bread that needs cutting, salads that need assembling, and the eternal challenge of making leftovers look like intentional menu choices rather than "we're serving you the stuff you didn't finish at lunch." Cook is in a marginally better mood now than she was during dinner prep, mainly because supper is less technically demanding, and also because she's been sampling the household ale for the past hour. She's not drunk. She'd never be drunk while on duty. That would be unprofessional, but she's definitely relaxed in a way that makes her slightly less terrifying. "You," she says, pointing at you with a knife, still alarming, but less aggressively so than this morning. "Sort the cold meats. Sort the cold meats presentably." You approach the larder where the dinner leftovers have been stored. There's the remains of the roasted swan, picked over but still substantial, cold capon, beef slices, mutton, and some game birds that look like they've been through a war. Your job is to take these partially dismembered creatures and arrange them on platters so they look appealing rather than like the corpses of a poultry massacre. This is harder than it sounds. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Supper in wealthy 17th century households was typically served between 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening and consisted primarily of cold dishes, meats, cheeses, bread, salads, preserved fruits along with ale or wine. It was intentionally simpler than dinner, both to give the kitchen staff some relief, though relief is relative when you're still working, and because contemporary medical theory held that heavy evening meals interfered with digestion and sleep. The family would eat moderately at supper and then retire for evening activities before bed. You're arranging swan slices in a fan pattern on a pewter platter when the pastry specialist appears with her evening contribution, a custard tart that she's clearly very proud of. It's actually beautiful golden pastry, smooth custard filling, a dusting of nutmeg on top. She sets it on the table with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. "Tell the butler this must be presented first, before the cream separates," she instructs, as if you have any control over serving order. The butler has also produced an evening offering, selections from the estate's cheese storage. There's a hard cheese aged for 6 months that's developed the kind of sharp, complex flavour that makes people who like cheese become insufferable about it. There's a softer cheese that's only 2 weeks old and still mild, and there's a cream cheese that was made yesterday and needs to be eaten immediately before it spoils. These are arranged on a wooden board with ceremony, because apparently cheese arrangement is also a skill you're supposed to have. Bread comes next. Not the fancy manchet from dinner that's gone, but good quality Maslin bread that's being baked fresh this afternoon. Your job is to slice it evenly, which sounds simple until you're using a knife that's been sharpened so many times it's developed a curve, and the bread is still warm enough to compress under pressure. You manage reasonably even slices. The ends and uneven pieces will become tomorrow's trenches. Nothing is wasted. Historians still argue whether the elaborate food presentation of the period was primarily about taste or visual display, but standing here arranging swan meat like you're creating a sculpture, you're pretty confident it's the latter. The family cares more about how food looks than how it tastes. Presentation is power. Appearance is everything. The salad is your next assignment, and salad in the 17th century doesn't mean lettuce with dressing. It means a complex arrangement of winter greens, whatever's survived in the kitchen garden, probably some kind of hardy lettuce, maybe endive, possibly cabbage, mixed with dried fruits, nuts, and dressed with oil, vinegar, and sugar. You're combining ingredients in a wooden bowl, trying to remember Cook's lecture about proper proportions, hoping you don't accidentally create something inedible. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sugar was so expensive in the 17th century that it was used sparingly even in wealthy households, and it was locked away in the same way we might secure jewellery. The sugar cone you're shaving fragments from for this salad costs more than you'll earn in 2 months. You're essentially garnishing lettuce with what is, for you, a fortune. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. While you're assembling salad, other servants are tackling their own evening tasks. Someone's being sent to the wine cellar for the evening's ale, and wine supper gets less fancy alcohol than dinner, so it's the regular household ale rather than imported French wine. The butler is polishing glasses that are already clean because presentation matters more than logic. A footman is setting the table in the dining room with less elaborate linens than dinner, but still more elaborate than anything you'll ever eat on. The coordination required is exhausting. You need the cold meats ready at the same time as the cheeses, which need to coincide with the bread being sliced, and everything has to come together at 6 o'clock sharp because the family's schedule is sacred. You're mentally juggling timing while physically juggling platters, and you dropped out of juggling school. Years ago, it was never a real school. You never juggled anything. This metaphor has gotten away from you because you're so tired. Cook calls for a final inspection. The platters are laid out on the preparation table. Swan, capon, beef, cheeses, bread, salad, the custard tart, some pickled vegetables from last summer's harvest, and a bowl of nuts that someone spent an hour cracking. It's substantially less food than dinner, but still enough to feed 15 people. The family is 8 people. You do the math and feel the familiar resentment rising. Acceptable, Cook pronounces, which coming from her is basically a standing ovation. Service in 10 minutes. Don't drop anything. The butler arrives with 2 footmen to collect the dishes. They load everything onto serving trays with practiced efficiency, and the procession begins toward the dining room. You watch them go, these platters of food you've prepared, knowing you won't taste any of it except maybe some bread and cheese scraps after the family is done. The kitchen exhales. Supper is prepared. The family will eat. The world continues its grinding rotation. You have approximately 90 minutes before the supper dishes return for washing. You consider sitting down, but remember that sitting is for people who finish their work, and you still need to scrub the preparation tables, clean the cutting boards, sweep the kitchen floor, and prepare tomorrow's bread dough for overnight rising. The evening shift continues. The sky outside is fully dark. Now it's November, so sunset came around 4:30 and now it's proper night. Candles are being lit throughout the house. Someone's making rounds with a taper, bringing light to the various rooms where the family will spend their evening. You're not getting candles. Servants work by firelight and whatever ambient illumination filters down from the family areas. You've learned to navigate the kitchen in near darkness, knowing where everything is by feel and memory. The preparation table cleaning begins. Scrub away the meat juices, the breadcrumbs, the cheese residue. Wipe everything down with cloths that will themselves need washing tomorrow. The work never ends. It just transforms into different types of work. Your hands are beyond redemption at this point, raw, chapped, probably developing permanent calluses. These are servant hands, working-class hands, the hands of someone who will never play the virginals or do decorative embroidery because your fingers are too damaged from actual labour. Somewhere above, the family is eating supper. Somewhere outside, the estate is sleeping in winter darkness. Here in the kitchen, you scrub, and scrub. By 6:30, the family has finished supper, or rather, they've picked at it with the enthusiasm of people who ate a massive meal 4 hours ago and aren't actually hungry, but feel obligated to perform the ritual of evening dining. The dishes are returning to the kitchen in a familiar parade of waste, and you're already mentally preparing for another round of washing. But first you get to eat, because even servants need fuel, and the household has finally reached the point in the day where feeding you becomes logistically necessary. The servants' supper happens in the kitchen itself, everyone grabbing space wherever they can find it. The long work table, stools pulled up to the hearth, some people just standing and eating because sitting requires energy they don't have. The food is, as promised from this morning, those glorious trenchers from dinner-thick slabs of bread that spent hours soaking up roasted swan fat, beef drippings, and venison pie gravy. You grab one that's particularly saturated, the bread dark brown and glistening with absorbed grease, and take your first bite of actually delicious food in approximately forever. It's heaven. Greasy, bread-based heaven. The trencher has absorbed every flavour from dinner. You can taste the herbs from the swan, the richness of the beef, even a hint of wine from the sauce. This is peasant food, elevated to something approaching luxury through the simple alchemy of wealthy people's leftovers. You eat standing up, too tired to care about dignity, cramming bread into your mouth like someone who's been working for 15 hours on porridge and spite. Around you, other servants are doing the same. The spit boy is literally gnawing his trencher like a feral animal. The dairymaid has stopped crying long enough to eat progress. Even the butler has abandoned his usual dignity to enthusiastically consume his bread plate. There's very little conversation. Everyone's too focused on eating, too exhausted for social niceties, too aware that this meal needs to be consumed quickly before the next wave of work hits. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The practice of using trenchers as both plates and subsequent food was remarkably efficient. Reduced dishwashing, eliminated food waste, and provided servants with more flavourful meals than they'd otherwise receive. However, it also reinforced social hierarchy in a visceral, literally consumable way. Servants ate what the gentry ate off of, their sustenance depending on their employers' leavings. The social order was edible, and you tasted it every day. You also get cold meat scraps, bits of swan that were too small or ugly for the family supper platters, some capon, a heel of cheese that's slightly too dry for genteel consumption. There's ale, the regular household stuff that's slightly sour but wet and alcoholic, which is all you really need. Someone's distributed the stale bread from yesterday, and there are a few pickled vegetables that didn't make the final supper cut. It's not fancy, but it's adequate, and adequacy is luxury when you're this tired. The upper servants eat separately in the steward's room, naturally, because hierarchy persists even during servants' meals. They're getting better cuts of the cold meat, fresher bread, and probably some of that custard tart the pastry specialist was so proud of. The steward and housekeeper are probably sitting at an actual table with actual chairs, using actual plates instead of eating trenchers off their laps like animals. Good for them, you suppose, though mostly you're too busy eating to care about their marginally superior dining experience. Historians still argue whether servant meal hierarchies created genuine resentment or were simply accepted as natural social order. But standing here watching the butler walk past with what looks like an entire quarter of cheese while you're gnawing bread soaked in yesterday's grease, you're pretty confident the answer is definitely resentment, definitely ongoing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some households had rules about servants sinning or talking loudly during meals, maintaining that even eating should be conducted with appropriate decorum and deference. Your household doesn't enforce this, partially because cook doesn't care, partially because everyone's too tired to sing anyway, but somewhere in England, servants are definitely eating in enforced silence while contemplating the absurdity of their existence. By 7 o'clock you've finished eating, and the evening's final tasks are beginning. The supper dishes need washing, less extensive than dinner, but still substantial. You return to your scullery station. It's basically your home now. You should probably just sleep here and begin the familiar routine. Hot water if you can get it, cold if you can't, soap made from ashes and fat, scrubbing until your hands want to file for divorce from your body. Meanwhile, upstairs, the family is settling into their evening entertainment. You can hear music drifting down, someone's playing the virginals, probably Elizabeth practicing after being inspired or shamed by this afternoon's visitor. The sound is actually pleasant when it's muffled by distance and you're not being forced to listen critically. It becomes background accompaniment to your dishwashing, a reminder that somewhere above you people are engaging in leisure while you engage in labour. The master is probably reading or smoking his pipette tobacco, being the fashionable vice of the era, expensive and imported and therefore absolutely essential for demonstrating status. The lady might be doing actual needlework now that there are no visitors to perform for, or she might be writing letters, or she might just be sitting quietly enjoying the fact that her day's obligations are complete and she can simply exist without having to manage anything. The children have been sent to prepare for bed, not actual bed yet, it's only 7, but the winding down process that involves washing faces with water someone else hauled, changing into night clothes that someone else laundered, and saying evening prayers led by the chaplain who's appeared for his second mandatory religious service of the day. You're washing plates and thinking about your own evening trajectory. After dishes, you need to set up tomorrow's bread, dough mixing flour, water, yeast, salt, and leaving it to rise overnight so there's fresh bread for breakfast. You need to bank the kitchen fires, covering them with ash so they stay alive through the night, but don't consume unnecessary firewood. You need to do a final sweep of the floor because Cook is particular about starting each day with a clean kitchen. And then, finally, you can climb to your garret and collapse onto your straw pallet. The dishes are decreasing, slowly, painfully slowly, but decreasing. Around you, other servants are finishing their own tasks. The stables are being locked up for the night. The outdoor workers have long since disappeared to their cottages. The upper servants are probably already in their rooms, reading by candlelight or doing whatever upper servants do when they're not oppressing you. The household is winding down like a great machine slowly coming to rest. The fires are being banked. The candles are being extinguished in rooms no longer occupied. The doors are being locked and checked. The manor is transitioning from day operations to night security mode. You finish the last plate. Your hands are wrinkled like preserved fruit from water exposure. Your back aches. Your feet hurt. Your shoulders are contemplating permanent retirement from the arm attachment business. But the dishes are done. Supper is complete. The blessed knowledge that work is nearly done settles over you like a thin, inadequate blanket. Nearly. Not quite, but nearly. You allow yourself a moment of relief before tackling the bread dough. The day is almost over. You've almost survived. Almost. By 8 o'clock, while you're kneading bread dough with arms that have already staged multiple mutinies throughout the day, the family is gathered in the parlour for the evening's entertainment. And by entertainment, we're talking about the kind of wholesome, vaguely tedious activities that the gentry consider appropriate for the hours before bed: storytelling, music, reading aloud, and the ever-present needlework that follows genteel women like a particularly persistent ghost. The parlour fire is burning cheerfully, consuming enough wood in one evening to heat your garret for a week. The family is arranged in comfortable chairs, the master with his pipe and a glass of wine, the lady with her inevitable embroidery, the children variously occupied with books and musical instruments. Even Aunt Prudence is here, knitting something that might be a stocking or might be a small sail. It's hard to tell. This is the domestic tableau that conduct books, romanticize the harmonious family gathering, everyone engaged in improving activities, the very picture of genteel virtue. The reality is slightly less idyllic. The master is half asleep, his pipe threatening to drop from his relaxed grip. The lady has completed maybe 5 stitches and is mostly staring into the fire. Elizabeth is attempting to read a sermon aloud for moral improvement, but she keeps stumbling over words, and her younger siblings are clearly not listening. Thomas is fidgeting. Little Anne is fighting sleep and losing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Evening gatherings in 17th century households served important social and educational functions beyond mere entertainment. Reading aloud, particularly from religious texts, but also classical literature and improving works, was how families transmitted culture, reinforced moral values, and demonstrated literacy and refinement. Music performance showed accomplishment. Or storytelling preserved family history and local legends. These weren't just pastimes, they were rituals of cultural reproduction. The master rouses himself enough to request a story. "Tell us about the ghost," he says to no one in particular, and the children perk up immediately because ghost stories are infinitely more interesting than sermons. The ghost he's referring to is the manor's resident. Legend. Apparently some previous owner's wife died in childbirth in the east bedroom and now allegedly haunts the corridor on stormy nights, weeping and carrying a phantom baby. You've worked in that corridor for 3 years and never seen or heard anything except mice and drafts, but the family loves this story. Aunt Prudence, who fancies herself the household storyteller, launches into the tale with relish. It was a night much like this one, cold and dark, when Lady Margaret felt the first pains of childbirth. She's embellishing heavily. You know this because you've heard her tell this story at least 15 times, and the details change constantly. Sometimes Lady Margaret dies at midnight, sometimes dawn. Sometimes the baby survives, sometimes it doesn't. The ghost's appearance varies from pale and sorrowful to terrifying and vengeful, depending on Aunt Prudence's mood. The children are entranced. Even Thomas, who's 14 and trying very hard to be too sophisticated for ghost stories, is leaning forward. The younger ones are wide-eyed, Anne clutching her doll like it might protect her from phantom mothers. The master is nodding along, probably because he's heard this story so many times it's become comforting background noise. Historians still argue whether ghost stories in country houses reflected genuine belief in the supernatural, or were primarily entertainment and social bonding mechanisms, but watching the family's reaction, you're pretty sure it's both. They half believe, half perform belief, and the ambiguity is part of the appeal. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households employed watchers servants specifically assigned to stay awake all night guarding against fire, theft, or supernatural incursions. These positions were usually filled by older men or retired soldiers who could be trusted to stay alert. Your household doesn't have dedicated watchers. Instead, the outdoor workers take turns, and you suspect they spend most of their watch time sleeping in the stables. But somewhere in England, someone is definitely being paid to watch for ghosts. The story concludes with Lady Margaret's ghost disappearing into the east wall, where there's definitely not a hidden passage. Definitely not. Ignore the draft. The children applaud. Aunt Prudence bows slightly, accepting praise for her dramatic delivery. The master suggests music next, and Elizabeth is dispatched to the virginals for an evening recital. She plays better now than she did this afternoon, possibly because there's no pressure of a music lesson, possibly because practice actually works despite every indication to the contrary during formal instruction. She performs a simple dance tune, then a slightly more complex piece that sounds almost intentional. The family listens with the polite attention of people who have no choice but to listen because they're all in the same room and there's literally nothing else to do. The master requests a song. Elizabeth has a decent voice, not amazing but adequate for family entertainment, and she sings something melancholy about love and loss that was probably popular 30 years ago. The lady joins in on the chorus. Even Thomas mumbles along on some verses. It's actually kind of pleasant, this moment of family harmony, and for a second you can understand why people romanticize country life. Then you remember you've been working for 16 hours and still have bread dough to finish, and the romance evaporates. By 9 o'clock, the chaplain appears for evening prayers because apparently morning prayers weren't sufficient to secure divine favour. Everyone kneels 7 in the comfort of the parlour. Kneeling is mandatory, and the chaplain launches into another round of psalms and petitions. At least this time, you're not kneeling on cold stone in a freezing hall with 40 other people. You're in the kitchen kneading bread, which is its own form of prayer if prayer involves repetitive physical labour that makes you question your life choices. The prayers drift down through the floorboards. Deliver us from evil. Protect this household. Bless our servants. Nice that you get mentioned, even if it's just a generic blessing category. The chaplain's voice has lost some of its morning intensity. Yevon, he's tired by 9 o'clock, and the prayers are shorter, more perfunctory. Everyone's ready for bed. After prayers comes the elaborate ritual of putting the gentry to bed, and elaborate doesn't begin to cover it. The lady retires first, attended by the housekeeper since Mary is still sick. There's the whole reverse process of this morning, unlacing the gown, removing the stays, taking off the numerous petticoats, brushing out the wig and setting it on its stand, brushing the lady's natural hair, helping her into her nightgown and sleeping cap, turning down the bed, warming the sheets with a warming pan filled with hot coals, checking that the chamber pot is empty and accessible, banking the bedroom fire so it stays warm but safe, closing the bed curtains just so. The master gets similar treatment from his valet, undressing, nightshirt, sleeping cap, bed preparation. The children are handled by the governess and whoever else is available. Everyone gets tucked in like precious cargo, protected from drafts and darkness and the general horror of having to do anything for themselves. You finish the bread dough, cover it with a damp cloth, and leave it to rise overnight. You bank the kitchen fires, sweep the floor one last time, and finally, you're released from duty. It's 9:30. You've been working for 17.5 hours. Upstairs, the family is safely cocooned in their warm beds, their fires banked, their comfort assured. You climb the stairs to your freezing garret, your straw pallet, your thin blanket. Tomorrow you'll do this all again. Tonight, you sleep. The Manor doesn't sleep, not really. Even as you're climbing those narrow servant stairs toward your garret, there are people still working, still watching, still ensuring that the household makes it through the night without disaster. The night watch has begun a rotating duty among the outdoor workers and lower male servants who take turns staying awake to guard against fire, theft, and the general chaos that darkness might bring. Tonight, it's Henry, one of the grooms, who's stationed himself in the stable yard with a lantern, a stick for protection, and what you suspect is a flask of something alcoholic to keep him company. His job is to walk the perimeter every hour, check the outbuildings, watch for fire or intruders, and ring the alarm bell if anything goes catastrophically wrong. In practice, he'll probably spend most of the night huddled in the stable with the horses, dozing in short intervals and hoping nothing happens that requires actual vigilance. The stable, ironically, is one of the warmest places on the estate at night. 8 horses generate significant body heat, and the stable is relatively well insulated with hay and closed doors. The stable boy, a kid maybe 12 years old who sleeps in a loft above the horse hisses, probably the warmest person in the entire manor right now, wrapped in horse blankets and surrounded by hay, the gentle sounds of the animals providing better comfort than any feather mattress. He doesn't know how lucky he is. Or maybe he does. The stable boy always looks suspiciously well rested compared to the rest of you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Sleeping arrangements in 17th century manor households were rigidly stratified by rank and reflected the social hierarchy as clearly as any organizational chart. The gentry slept in private chambers with actual beds, feather mattresses, embroidered hangings, and fires. Upper servants got small private rooms or shared rooms with 1 or 2 others, actual bed frames, and maybe a thin mattress. Lower servants. Your category slept in communal garrets or outbuildings on straw pallets, sharing space with anywhere from 4 to 20 other people, with minimal bedding and no heat. You reach the garret, and the cold hits you like a physical assault. November air has seeped through every gap in the roof tiles, and your breath immediately becomes visible clouds. The space is long and low-ceilinged, running the length of the manor's top floor, divided by gender but otherwise communal. The female servants section holds about 12 straw pallets arranged on the floor with barely enough space between them to walk. Some girls are already asleep, huddled under whatever coverings they own. Others are still awake, whispering in the darkness, too cold or too wired from the day's work to settle. You navigate to your pallet by feel and memory, third from the left, near the chimney breast that provides the only minimal warmth this room will get. The chimney from the family's bedroom fire runs up through here, and if you press against the brick, you can feel faint residual heat. It's not much, but it's something. This spot is prime real estate in the servant hierarchy, and you guard it jealously. Your bed is a cloth sack stuffed with straw, laid directly on the floorboards. You have 1 wool blanket, thin and scratchy, that you bought with 6 months of saved wages. You have the clothes you're wearing, which will also be the clothes you wear tomorrow because you own exactly 2 outfits, and the other one is currently drying from yesterday's laundry water splashing. You have no pillow. You bunch up your spare apron for head support. This is it. This is your sleeping accommodation at one of the more prosperous country manors in England. Historians still argue whether servant sleeping conditions were considered adequate for the era or recognised as problematic even by contemporary standards, but lying here on straw that's starting to develop suspicious lumps and possibly inhabitants, you're pretty confident nobody with actual power cared enough to argue about it. The other servants are settling in around you. Someone's coughing, that wet, consumptive cough that's been going around for weeks. Someone else is crying quietly, probably the new girl who still hasn't adjusted to the brutal schedule and the soul-crushing realization that this is her life now. The dairymaid, of course, is also crying, but that's just her default setting at this point. Someone's snoring already, dead to the world despite the cold and the hard floor and the general misery of existence. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households provided servant livery, standardized clothing in house colors, which sounds generous until you realize it was primarily about making servants visually identifiable as property of the household, and the cost was often deducted from wages. Your household doesn't do livery, so you're responsible for your own clothing, which means most servants wear the same outfit until it literally disintegrates and then patch it with scraps until the patches need patches. Below you, the house is settling into its night configuration. The master and lady are asleep in their warm bed, curtains drawn against drafts, chamber pot accessible, fire banked to save smouldering. The children are similarly cocooned in their nursery beds, the youngest ones probably sharing beds for warmth and comfort. Aunt Prudence is in her chamber, probably still awake and mentally cataloguing grievances to share tomorrow. The upper servants are in their small but private rooms, actual beds with actual mattresses, doors that close, the luxury of solitude. The outdoor workers who aren't on watch duty have disappeared to their cottages, small structures scattered around the estate grounds where married workers live with their families. These cottages are barely better than the garret in terms of construction, but at least they offer privacy and the ability to maintain a fire through the night if you can afford the firewood. Some workers share cottages, sleeping in shifts, maximizing the limited housing available. You burrow under your thin blanket, trying to find a position where the straw isn't poking through the sack directly into your spine. The cold is seeping up from the floorboards, and you curl into yourself, trying to preserve body heat. Around you, other servants are doing the same. A dozen young women arranged on the floor like cargo, trying to rest enough to survive tomorrow's identical routine. The mice are active in the rafters. You can hear them scuttling, squeaking, living their mouse lives completely unconcerned with human hierarchies or labour conditions. A rat runs across someone's pallet and she yelps, then goes quiet, probably embarrassed. The rats are bolder at night. You've learned to sleep through them, mostly. Someone whispers a prayer, sit, someone else tells her to shut up. The daily tensions don't disappear just because it's nighttime, they just shift into different forms. But gradually, exhaustion wins. One by one, the sounds decrease. Breathing becomes regular. The garret fills with the soft sounds of sleeping servants, snores, whimpers, the rustling of straw as people shift positions. Outside, Henry walks his patrol, lantern bobbing in the darkness. The stable boy shifts in his warm hay nest. The horses doze, standing. The manor creaks and settles, old timbers adjusting to night temperatures. You close your eyes. You close your eyes. Your body aches in approximately 15 different locations. Your hands are cracked and raw. Your feet hurt. Your back is staging a formal protest. But you're horizontal, you're marginally sheltered, and work won't resume for approximately 6 hours. In the hierarchy of sleeping arrangements, you're near the bottom. But you're not the night watchman standing in the cold. You're not the stable boy who'll wake when the horses get restless. You're not on chamber pot duty for tomorrow's pre-dawn rounds. Small mercies. One last time. The day is done. Tomorrow will be identical. But for now, for these brief hours, you rest. The manor sleeps in layers comfort, descending through the floors, warmth concentrating at the top, cold rising to find you here in the garret. This is your world. This is everyone's world. The endless cycle continues. But for now, sleep. And now, as the cold November night settles over the manor like a heavy blanket, as the last candles gutter out in the family chambers and the fires bank to glowing embers, let yourself drift with these final images. The stable boy shifts in his warm nest of hay, horses breathing softly around him. The night watchman walks his quiet rounds, lantern casting long shadows across the courtyard stones. In the garret, 12 servants sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of exhaustion, their breathing synchronized in the darkness, bodies finally at rest after 17 hours of relentless labor. The manor itself breathes, timbers creaking, settling, the ancient stones holding warmth and cold in equal measure. Somewhere a mouse scurries. Somewhere a dog dreams. The great wheel of household life has paused just for these few hours before it begins turning again at 4 o'clock when the bell rings and the whole beautiful, terrible cycle starts anew. But that's tomorrow. Tonight there's only the darkness, the cold, the blessed relief of horizontal rest. The day you've witnessed this single ordinary day in an ordinary country, Manor is finally, mercifully complete. Every meal prepared, every dish washed, every floor swept, every task finished until morning brings them all back again. Let the images fade now. The kitchen hearths cooling to ash, the family safe in their feather beds. the servants scattered across their pallets like seeds, the night watch walking his rounds through the sleeping estate. Everything quiet, everything still, everyone, finally, at rest in their assigned places in the great hierarchy of sleep. Close your eyes with them. Jules, let the manor fade into comfortable darkness. Tomorrow the bell will ring, the fires will roar back to life, the endless work will resume. But tonight, there's only sleep and dreams and the gentle knowledge that this day, at least, is done. Sweet dreams.